This is a narration of my life story. For the full story as it was intended to be watched, go to my YouTube channel on the playlist The Greatest Story Ever Told. This is the life of a man who was different, a man who didn't fit in, a man driven by love. It's said that we all forget everything before the age of 8. No one truly knows why. But I never forgot. I remember everything. I remember kindy, my toddler years, a helpless baby, being born, and before that. It all started with a peaceful emptiness, like sleep without dreaming, like listening when there's nothing to hear. I was simply an observer, with nothing to observe, and nothing more. My first experience was the flow of time, but I didn't know until something happened. A bolt of lightning, and then nothing again. Time went on. It happened again, and a third time. Time went on. Fading in from silence, the sound of a faint heartbeat. It slowly grew louder, and I felt cold. The cold made me feel alone, but the heartbeat kept me company. The lightning came back again, but weaker. I slowly learned to steer it into thoughts that fizzled out. But it would fade away and come back and fade again, back and forth. The heartbeat would fade and return too. I didn't like that. Time went on. A jolt. My leg kicked all on its own. A leg I never knew I had. I tried to do it on my own, but I couldn't. Another jolt. And another. I learned to do it on my own. And then my other leg. And later my arms. Time went on. I touched a wall. I realized I was in a bubble, and the heartbeat was outside and above. I wasn't so alone and scared anymore. I was in my own bubble. I played with my arms and legs and thoughts. Time went on. I tried to communicate with the heartbeat. I knew it looked after me. But did it care? Did it know I was there? It never answered. It scared me when it went out of beat. There were loud sounds close by. So loud they hurt. I kicked in protest. I thought the heartbeat was angry with me. Time went on. I could hear faint sounds on the outside. I thought the heartbeat was showing me. But the sounds grew louder and annoyed me. I kicked in protest. Time went on. More jolts, more to play with. Sucking and pushing my lungs. I used my thumb to help. Time went on. The walls got closer. I realized I was growing. I was running out of space. Time went on. I was getting cramped and hot. couldn't get comfortable anymore. There was room below, but I was always scared of going down there. Eventually I tried it. I got stuck, as I feared, and panicked. I pushed the bubble for room, and it broke. The more I squirmed, the further down I went. It was so cramped, I was being squashed. I went so far, I knew I couldn't get back. I thought the heartbeat was getting rid of me, but the further I went, the more I realized. I was going somewhere, through a tunnel. I hoped it would open up on the other side. So I helped. I came out, and it was so cold. I tried to open my eyes, but it hurt. I tried to push, and it came out as a cry. My lungs pulled back, forcing me to breathe in. I cried again. It made me feel better. I was so cold, but then I got a little warmer. I didn't like it here. I wanted my bubble back when it wasn't so cramped. I got so tired here and mostly slept. Time went on. I was born to the wrong parents at the wrong time. My father almost died and lost his best friend in a horrific car accident before I was born. He barely survived and went through extensive surgery. He became a broken, bitter man and turned into a drunk. With all the operations and time in recovery, I didn't know him in the early days. My mother came from a broken family. She never learned how to express herself and survived the motherly scorn of being the third unwanted child to another man by disconnecting in the comfort of apathy. She just went through life, going through the motions, putting on a big act, living in denial. She picked up a habit of turning a blind eye to any unpleasant truth, with the indulgence of sweet lies and purposely constructed delusions. Before my pregnancy, they were building a life. But then I came along, and everything was torn apart before I was even born. I became an unwanted burden, looked upon as the object of their misfortune. I was silently hated before I even woke up in the womb. I always feared that the heartbeat didn't care for me. It turned out to be true. My mother went through the motions, trying to hide her contempt for me. She began projecting her own childhood onto me, and I became the scapegoat for everything wrong in her life. Everything her mother did to her, she did to me and more. My father still showed a spark of passion from time to time, but it was always sapped away by my mother's apathy. He didn't hate me as much as my mother, but he still saw me as the object of his misfortune. Over time, the contempt for me was to get much worse. But I didn't know any of this. Not yet, anyway. On my first days, I tried to see what was going on around me, but I couldn't see. It always hurt my eyes. I became so tired all the time that I withdrew and just slept most of the time. Time went on. I knew there was another someone there. There were others too, but it was almost always the same one. They did things to me and moved me around. I didn't understand what was going on. I tried to cry out sometimes to be moved back into a more comfortable position and to get away from the bright light that was constantly hurting my eyes even when they were closed. Most of the time I was just ignored. The ebb and flow of pushing and sucking was the only way I could express myself. When I felt upset, I wanted to push and purge it, and it came out as a cry. When I needed comfort, I wanted to suck and absorb. After a while, I tried sometimes taking a quick peek at my surroundings when it was dark enough. Things were blurry at first, but it improved as time went on. I learned to recognize the face of the one who kept moving me around. I eventually tried to communicate with them, but they just kept ignoring me. And then one time I was being changed. I was looking at a rug on the wall and laughing at how hard and unpredictable it was to follow the lines in the pattern. The one who kept moving me all the time spoke to me, and I laughed at the rug to tell them what I was laughing at. It was my first proper communication with another person. They knew I was laughing at the red rug, but they didn't understand why, as much as I tried to explain. Not much communication happened after that. I was mostly ignored. I would be changed and ignored, no matter how much I tried to communicate. I was treated very coldly for the most part, and resorted to sucking my own thumb for comfort, finding none anywhere else. Time went on. My parents took me to someone's house. They were talking at a table and I wanted to join in, but they ignored me. They were all drinking something and changed. Then they made smoke everywhere that made me sick. I complained, but they ignored me. After a while, one of them picked me up. One moment I was in their arms, the next they dropped me on the head. They dropped me head first on the hard kitchen floor. I fell so far. It hurt so much. I screamed in pain for someone to help me. I kept blacking out and losing my sight. I tried to tell them something was very wrong, but they didn't care and ignored me. They wanted me to shut up and dumped me in a scary room all day. I desperately screamed all day, but no one came. I could hear them partying loudly and drowning my screams out with loud music. Eventually, someone finally came. One of their friends. He came to the door and I stopped crying. I tried to tell him something was desperately wrong. Then he angrily told me to shut up and stop ruining their fun, and slammed the door. I screamed and screamed for hours while they had a party. I was abandoned. I thought I was going to die, and no longer had the strength to cry. I was paralyzed. I could barely breathe. I kept passing out. I gave up hope and stopped crying because it only hurt more, and no one ever came. After that, I never let anyone pick me up ever again. I was hurt badly. My trust was violated, and they didn't care. I had to look after myself. My mother started saying I was autistic, that I had mental problems, that I was faulty, that I wasn't even a real person, because I kept to myself, and I didn't let anyone pick me up anymore. I was just a baby. Time went on. I met my older brother. He hated me and blamed me for everything. He never played with me once, avoided me like a disease. My parents would discuss with other adults about the ugly disappointment, believing me to be subhuman, retarded, and unable to understand. Anytime I spoke, yelled at. Anything I liked, a shameful abomination. Constantly reminded I was an ugly freak, a deformed creature with mental problems. I never fully formed, never grew into a person, and therefore didn't have real feelings. I was told to be grateful for their tolerance and stay out of their way. I tried so hard for them to love me, but I was unworthy, so I stayed away. And then a new baby arrived. They wouldn't let me near him. I wasn't part of the family. I was the abomination, the stain on the family secret. They got everything while I went without. I didn't mind. I just wanted a friend. Whenever I tried to join in, I was threatened with a mental home. So I spent the first 4 years alone. My only toy, a barrel of monkeys. I found what I could and took things apart. I secretly fixed toys for my brothers and learned as much as I could. I had so many questions about the world, with no one to ask. So I made an imaginary friend, a pet rock. He just sat there quietly and listened, never judging me or putting me down. According to my mother, my imaginary friend was proof I was a mental case. Anything I said or did was twisted by my mother into a mental problem. The only solution: to lobotomize me and lock me up in a mental home for the rest of my life. My brothers joined in and made fun of my imaginary friend. I had to throw away my only friend and stay alone to avoid a mental home. My younger brother reached out to me. He noticed how they treated me differently. He felt bad about it and became my only friend. He felt sorry for me and gave me a couple of his toys. It didn't bother me going without. I was happy enough just to have someone to play with. He had a speech impediment and I was his only translator. Time went on. I had to stay in my room, but I sometimes peeked around the corner. The adults were playing an organ, but they couldn't get the notes right. I watched them and studied from afar. When they left, I jumped on and played. They came back in anger, convinced that I had been secretly practicing. It was my first time. Time went on. My older brother and his friend attempted to murder me. They told me I had to sit on a railing 3 stories high. They demanded my trust and kicked me in the back with all their strength. I fell 3 stories, landing on my back, paralyzed and unable to cry out for help. I was covered in ants and left there to die, until a stranger found me and called my mother. My mother took her time. She was furious for embarrassing her in front of strangers. She threw a bucket of cold water over me and pretended it never happened. Time went on. I knew what they were doing was wrong, so I decided to stop playing nice. I engaged everyone I met about everything: philosophy, psychology, the meaning of life. They kept threatening me with a mental home, but I called their bluff and persisted. They avoided answering, and when they did, I caught them out lying every time. They pretended to be all-knowing, but they didn't know or understand anything. I engaged every problem, showed them where they went wrong, and gave them solutions. Everyone began to fear me. No child should know and understand these things. They tried to keep me down, in fear of what I was capable of. I was no longer retarded, but a devil child who was dangerous. I held on for my first day at school. They couldn't keep me in chains for much longer. I wanted to meet the outside world, and those with a kind and curious heart like me. And then that day finally came. I was horrified. These people were almost as bad, empty inside and full of apathy. On my first day, I saw other children poking a tree to make it bleed. I was horrified and chased them off. I sat at the tree and cried for it all day, protecting it from harm. No one knew why I was upset, and a large crowd grew throughout the day. Eventually, a little girl walked up to me, asking me what was wrong. I told her I felt sorry for the tree. I was protecting it from the pokers. She began to cry with me and called me beautiful. She went back and told the teachers and other kids, and they began to cry as well. They were amazed that anyone would care so much for a mere tree, calling me a hero. I was prepared to sacrifice my life for that tree, and made an agreement with everyone. One by one, I made every teacher and student promise to protect the tree and never hurt it. All the girls kept calling me their hero and wanted to be my girlfriend, but I declined. Time went on. My birthday was coming up, and I had a plan. I asked my parents if I could have a cake, and they declined at first. So I asked my teacher to speak to them, knowing they would do it for their reputation. I didn't want a toy, I just wanted a cake. A big cake, as big as can be. When the day came, I brought my cake to school. I cut a piece for every single teacher and student in my year. But there was still so much left. So I went around the school and handpicked those with a good heart who needed inspiration. My cake fed half the school, but I refused to take a piece for myself. I wanted them to stop the apathy and see their own potential. Time went on. And then we had to move away. I went to a new school in a very different world. Something was very wrong. Everyone was so mean and sad. I got picked on because I was too smart, too white, too kind. They said I didn't belong. I wasn't one of them. My teacher noticed I was different and called me a genius. My parents insisted he was wrong and showed no interest in my potential. He tried to prove it to my parents, but the idea was considered extremely offensive. Other teachers picked up on it. They took advantage of a vulnerable child. In year 3, my new teacher humiliated me every few minutes of every day. Echoing my parents, I wasn't a human, but an ugly abomination and a mental case. It was then I realized why everyone was so mean. It was because they had to be. The school was run by bully teachers in a hierarchy of bully or be bullied. Other children watched in terror as my teacher grilled me all day, every day. A talent scout noticed my musical ability and insisted I join the school band. My teacher said I couldn't because I wasn't a real person. Then she changed her mind because she wanted a break from my ugly face this was just a sign of what was to come. Before things got worse, a ray of sunlight shone through the clouds. My parents went on a holiday overseas. They took my older brother with them and dumped my younger brother and I at our grandmother's. For a couple of weeks, we went to a new school. This school was in absolute poverty. There was no bullying here. Everyone looked out for each other. They went without, just as I did. They accepted me with open arms. They were so poor the school didn't even have a ball to play with, but I did. As a consolation gift for dumping us at our grandmother's, we were each given a small gift. I was given a soccer ball, the only ball I was ever given. I brought that ball to school every day, and the whole school played soccer without knowing where it came from. They thought it was a miracle, until they found out it came from me. Everyone there loved me. I thought it was because of the ball, but they assured me it wasn't. They said it was because I was a beautiful person, that I wasn't like other people. Some of them said I was a guardian angel who would save them one day. I didn't understand why they said that. When it came time for me to go, all the other kids started crying. They started a petition to get me to stay. It spread from class to class until a large portion of the school signed it by the end of the day. I told my parents I didn't want to go. Even my grandmother pleaded with them to let me stay. On the day I left, my grandmother handed me a note. She said the school gave it to her, that it was a message from all of them. That note mentioned how they all lived in their own world there, separated from everyone else because they were so poor. They mentioned how I was the only good thing that came from the world outside theirs, that every time someone from the outside came, they were a rich, mean person who took what little they had. They said I was their hero because I showed them there are good people out there, and that gave them hope. I wrote a thank you message back, told them I would never forget them, and promised to return one day. My grandmother told me it was read out in assembly. I also donated my only ball to the school. When I returned to the bad school, they thought I was gone for good. The campaign against me stepped up a gear. My only escape was computers, video games, and solitude in the mountains. I looked after wild animals, took apart computers, and studied video games. I fixed a broken Commodore 64 and learned how to program it with torn up books. I made games and scripted AI responses to simulate a new friend who said kind things. I also played other consoles, especially Nintendo, and beat every game I found. I collected lost coins to buy game magazines in search of world records. One by one, I beat every record and kept going. It was my little secret. Two years of the same bully teacher. I developed nervous tics. I thought I was finally free, but this teacher was just as bad. He brought me to my brother's class and showed me as his teacher humiliated him. He told me that until I learned my place, they would do this to him and any friend I made. My place was below everyone else, and I would always be given a D. 2 afternoons a week, I was put into a special class for the retarded. As time went on, the school counsellor was convinced there was nothing wrong with me. He tried to reason with the teachers, but they aggressively insisted on the humiliation. Being retarded wasn't all bad. It gave me a break from the bullying and humiliation. And then the school brought in teacher assistants as part of a new training law. The assistant often caught my teacher when he thought she wasn't looking and was horrified. She brought a camera into school to catch it on videotape and take them to court. But she was caught and the assistants were all expelled from the school. My teacher violently took me into an empty room, telling me that they had friends high up. "Nothing will come of this," he said, with a smirk. I didn't understand what he meant. For 2 weeks, he suddenly stopped picking on me. I didn't know why, but I was glad. The school counsellor came to me in class. He told me in tears that he tried his best. They came to his home and said they would be back if he didn't withdraw his complaint. He had to go far away to protect his family, and so it was all covered up. They blamed me for everything and said they had someone special prepared next year. Meanwhile, my parents took me to a psychologist. They wanted to drug me. The psychologist gave me a pocket game to play while they talked about my nervous tics. I held my ear to the door as they argued. The psychologist blamed my parents for it all. He said I was very normal and intelligent, and he had seen this child abuse before. I ran back to the chair and played the pocket game, gaining over 1 million points. I looked at a wall and noticed the score chart. Other boys had hundreds, a few thousands. The highest score was 11,000. I stopped playing. I went back to the door, and the psychologist told my father drugs would solve nothing. I went back and played again, this time getting well over 10 million before I gave up and cried. They finally came out. The psychologist asked for my score, and I cried. I said it was best I didn't say, that he wouldn't believe me anyway. He said he would believe anything I said, so I told him and flinched. As he walked over and added my score, I began to cry again. I thanked him and told him that no one has ever been so kind to me before. My father became furious and told me to hurry up or he would go without me. My family were so angry. They refused to speak, pretending I wasn't there. When they finally did, they accused me of manipulating everyone around me. Time went on. The teachers said they had someone special prepared for me, and I would know my place. My new teacher was the final boss and ringleader of all the other bullies. He told me he would dedicate the entire year to breaking me. But they already did. But it wasn't my spirit they wanted to break. It was my nature. They hated the fact that as much as they broke me, they couldn't mold me. It was all about power. Power they could never take from me. I was attacked from every angle and made an example of every day. I was repeatedly humiliated in front of the whole school to intimidate everyone. One time, there was a Mr. Universe competition. They needed one more. In front of the whole school, my teacher picked me. And his reason? that they needed to include an ugly retard to make the other boys look good. He grilled me on my ugliness in front of the whole school until I had a nervous tick. He told me to freeze in that position while girls came up to vote with a coin. Most of the girls stopped at me in tears while the teachers told them to move on. Time went on. A talent scout noticed my sport ability and insisted I join the state football team. He said he had never seen anyone with so much coordination and wanted to talk to me. My teacher said he can't have me, that I had big problems and was off limits. The scout grilled him about these so-called problems until my teacher snapped. My teacher violently threatened to beat up the scout if he didn't stay away from me. The scout grabbed him and threatened him back. He cowered and backed off. The scout said there was something sinister going on and he would find out what it is. As the scout walked off, my teacher taunted him and said they wouldn't find anything. A week later, sport day was now football, so I decided to play sport at my own level. I went for every tackle, intercepted the ball and scored a try every time I got the ball. I was a one-man army, light years ahead of everyone else. They didn't know what to do. They made elaborate rules to even the sides, until it was me against every boy in my year. I still scored a try, which they disallowed. Some of the boys thought it was funny. The teachers never acknowledged me. They put down the others and demanded they try harder. But other boys complained. There was no way to beat me. So long as I played, the sides would always be uneven. The teachers banned me from football and forced me to play tunnel ball with the girls. The teachers laughed at me and taunted me. They told me to grab the girls from behind. Then they would accuse me of looking up their skirts to turn them against me. Then they would call me a poof for saying nothing and not groping the girls. After several weeks, the girls stuck up for me and called me a gentleman. They said what the teachers were doing was wrong and they would tell their parents. Next week, we all played generic unisex sports, and it was all my fault. The teachers tried desperately to turn everyone against me, but it wasn't working. Every attempt to tighten their grip backfired and caused more dissent. My teacher began spending every afternoon after lunch doing chants against me. Under the threat of a cane, everyone had to enthusiastically join in with the chants. Jeremy's ugly, Jeremy stinks, Jeremy's a retard, Jeremy's a spastic. While they chanted every day, I did all my work and then covered my head until the bell. My teacher brought in kids from outside to join in, and the class became a crowd. I was told that the chanting could be heard from one end of the school to the other. And then one day I saw a man looking inside the classroom while they were chanting. He stood outside and became angry, returning to look several times before knocking. My teacher panicked and told everyone to be silent as he opened the door. The angry man came storming in and held my teacher up against the blackboard. He said his daughter was coming home in tears over what they were doing to a boy. He didn't believe it at first until he came to see it all for himself. He told my teacher that he will break both his legs if he hears one more story. My teacher went from being a big tough bully into the greatest coward I've ever seen. The rest of the day was spent in complete silence. No schoolwork, nothing. The following day, more silence, until he started on me again. I stood up to him and called him a bully and a coward who picks on kids. He cowered and begged me to stop, and the rest of the day was spent in silence. The day after that, my teacher suddenly came at me violently. He locked me up in the bag storage area and told me I would die in there. At the end of the day, he explained what I was to do. I had to come to school every day before everyone else and lock myself in there. I had to stay there until every other kid had left the school, up to 5 p.m. I was not allowed to speak to anyone, else things would even be worse for me. I was to do this every day, indefinitely, and he would come in and eat my lunch. I was not allowed to eat, drink, water, or go to the toilet. I had to use a bin for everything. Eventually, the lights started buzzing, and I was left in there, in darkness. I went to school when it was dark. I got home when it was dark. I tried to tell my parents, but they grounded me and I went without dinner too. All I had to eat every day was one piece of toast every morning. I was so hungry that I ate someone's lunch. As he grabbed his bag, I apologized. He turned white and said it was fine. They were no longer allowed to use the bag room in case I ate their lunch. And so the few seconds of contact I had every day was gone. I spent all day, every day, in the dark, in a closet, starved and alone with a rotten bin. Time went on. I was finally let out. The light was so bright that I couldn't see. When my eyes adjusted, I could see all the other kids staring at me in terror. My teacher continued putting it over me, believing he had completely broken me. As he mocked my intelligence, I took it with a smile because I had no idea. I completed the whole year of maths in a single afternoon and folded my arms. He told me off for not doing my work. I said it was done. He asked how much. I said all of it. He came over with a confused look. The whole day's work? The whole week? No, the whole year in a single afternoon. He said he would look for mistakes, and if he found one, I would repeat the whole year. Finding none, he told me to sit down, shut up, and don't make a sound all day. The next day he brought in an expert with a high school math book for geniuses. My teacher ran ahead and told me, "Alright, bird brain, you think you're smart, do you? Try this out." The expert wanted to talk to me, but my teacher wouldn't let him. I was supposed to have a calculator, but my teacher insisted I not have one. As the expert became angry with my teacher, he pushed him out the door. I didn't know where to start, all these new symbols I didn't understand. I found an explanation in the back of the book and finished it in 3 days. I sat there with my arms folded. He told me off for not doing my work. I said it was done. He came over, confused yet again, and also scared. He said he would go over it with a fine comb, and if there was one mistake, I would have to do it all over again, starting the whole year from scratch. He used a calculator and struggled to solve the equations himself. He angrily threw the book in the bin. I asked if there were any errors. He told me to shut up and called me a smartass. He completely ignored me for the rest of the year, pretending I didn't exist. Near the end of the year, all of year 5 and 6 were taken to a secluded area. The teachers told us what goes on in school stays in school. If anyone talked, they would come after us and our families. Some kids started crying, and I was about to stand up in protest. But then another boy stood up, and another, and another. "This is wrong. It's because of what you're doing to Jeremy." More crying, more standing up in protest. The teachers panicked. Every effort to defeat me backfired on them and inspired dissent in my favour. As they panicked and tried to do damage control, we were quickly dispersed. 2 weeks later, I was finally free from their school and prison. Time went on. In high school, I went from getting downgraded D's to straight A's. I still didn't fit in. Other boys were intimidated by my intellectual and sporting abilities. I had no interest in playing popularity games and taking part in hierarchies. Most of the girls had a quiet respect for me due to everything I survived. They kept coming up to me in tears, telling me that I was so normal and asking me how I survived without going insane. I would always say, "I don't know, I didn't have much of a choice." As each year went on, new Year 7s would come up to me, telling me about the impact I left on the primary school. The stories of what happened went around the school and were passed on to newer generations. The principal resigned, and my Year 6 teacher became the new principal. They told me I inspired the whole school to stand up against them, look out for each other, and force things to change. When I left that school, they targeted my brother. Unlike me, my parents believed him. I tried to suggest that maybe I was telling the truth all along. The usual response: freak out and start threatening me with a mental home to bury their shame. Since early childhood, I had an allergy to cigarette smoke. By high school, that allergy became extreme and life-threatening. My family all smoked. My mother especially would spend every free moment smoking inside, one cigarette after another, endlessly. It was so bad that the house was stained yellow. Even my very school clothes were yellow and stunk of cigarettes. There was no way to get away from it, and the extreme nausea it caused. I had to spend all my time outside, bitten by spiders and a plague of mosquitoes. I spent a lot of time in the mountains just to get away from cigarettes. My face would swell up and turn into painful lesions that at one time covered my whole face. Any time I so much as coughed at cigarette smoke, my family, especially my mother, would accuse me of random mental illnesses and violently threaten me with a mental home. I begged them to stop, but they would only do it more and blow smoke at me out of spite. I spent an hour at school every day, coughing, choking and throwing up because of cigarette smoke. I went to the roller skating rink every weekend. The only time I ever felt free and accepted was on roller skates. I taught other people how to skate and won every competition. I saved up all the free tickets I won and gave them to my brother and all his friends for his birthday. From then on, the rules were changed and I could only win one ticket per night. While it was better in high school, I still didn't fit in. The boys cast me out, intimidated by my abilities and how the girls spoke about me. The girls would tell all the boys to be more like me, but they themselves avoided me. They were just shy, but I thought it was because I was ugly and repulsive. After all, that's what I grew up being told all day, every day. Bullies didn't like me because I stood up to them and protected their victims. I was immune to peer pressure and hierarchies. I was attacked repeatedly by gangs of bullies. I never lost a fight, even when I was gravely outnumbered. Other boys knew I could fight and tried to set other boys against me to see me in action. I hated fighting, but it was the only language some people understood. To survive, I had to be an introvert. I was very different, and that was not okay. Everything I liked, all of my passions, intensely ridiculed. How dare I not conform? And so I lived two lives. My public life was mediocre, where I silently absorbed the put-downs and humiliation of being labelled weak and inferior. My other life was in the world of computers and the mountains. I designed games, spent my time in nature and befriended wild animals. In year 8, I passed out in the heat and hit my head so hard that I had a seizure. When I woke up, I lost all my memory. I didn't even understand English. I had a severe concussion that took months to recover. I couldn't focus anymore. I felt like I was brain damaged. By year 9, I decided to see if I still had it. I finished year 9 maths without a calculator in 2 weeks. They didn't ridicule me for showing my true colours. They feared me like a monster. And so I went back to being quietly mediocre for the comfort of others. Every now and then I would put effort in and ace a test as a reminder. In year 10, I fell in love with a new girl who came to my school. The first time I saw her, my heart stopped. But how could I tell her? No one would ever want me. I wasn't even human. I would be punished so much for daring to love. So I never told anyone. In year 11, there was a vote on which boy the girls would like to go on a date with. All the girls picked me. I was in shock. At the first chance, I ran to a private place and broke down. From a lifetime of being an ugly, repulsive abomination that wasn't even human, to that. In year 12, the same thing happened. All the girls picked me, the ugly duckling. By the end of year 12, I finally sent the girl I loved a bunch of roses and a letter of confession. I never heard back. I broke down. I didn't go to the school formal. Throughout high school, I lived in a room with a broken window and broken pipes in the wall. My room was covered in spiders from outside. Mold grew all over the walls and carpet from the broken pipes. In combination with cigarette smoke, I developed a variety of chronic health problems. When school ended, I was lost. The girl I loved was everything to me. She was the only reason I stayed to year 12, trying to find a way to tell her. And when I finally confessed my love after a lifetime of being shut down, I was completely ignored. After some time passed, I decided to completely start over with my whole life, to throw away everything I knew and believed, and relearn everything. When I wasn't in the mountains, I spent most of my time studying everything I could to get my hands on. I went to the roller skating rink every Friday and Saturday night. I made a lot of friends. For the first time, I was around people who actually appreciated me. Everyone there treated me like a normal person. As time went on, I fell in love with the girl. I wasn't ready for it. I confessed to a friend in confidence. As soon as I realized I was in love, I was struck with the deadly flu. I was so sick that I saw a doctor in desperation. The first thing he asked me was about my mother and my mental state. I was confused about his question until he revealed to me that my mother had been having meetings with him. She was telling him fictional stories about me and trying to gather support for her plan to have me taken away to a mental home. Apparently, she didn't follow through with her plans, and he was surprised to see me. Realizing an opportunity, this doctor exploited me. This doctor was about to retire. For a retirement fund, he was making money on the side by using his patients as guinea pigs for pharmaceutical companies. My mother's hatred for me was the perfect cover. If I talked about being experimented on, I would be labelled insane and taken away with my own mother as a false witness. This doctor initially lied to me and used a potent experimental immune system suppressant while I was critically ill from the flu. My health rapidly declined. I went back to the doctor and he confessed to me that it wasn't flu medication. He insisted that I should be okay, and it would be in my best interest to continue the course. I couldn't sleep for a month and a half because I couldn't breathe. I almost died until I stopped taking the suppressant. My health rapidly improved and I was able to go skating again after 2 weeks. Thousands of people died from it, including a large number of his patients. The amount of deaths and permanent damage sparked an investigation. It made it into the news, but as far as I know, no one was ever held accountable. I never fully recovered and developed psoriasis on my scalp. When I returned to skating, little did I know that all the girls liked me, and the friend I confessed to was throbbing with jealousy. He wanted her best friend, and little did I know that she had a big crush on me. While I was sick, my friend made up an elaborate web of lies about me to turn them both against me. The girl I loved stopped talking to me. I never got the chance to tell her what she meant to me. Completely ignored again. Last time, it cost me everything I had. This time, it was more than I could pay. I was completely lost and defeated. But then a miracle happened. The little girl started going skating. She was always so kind to me. I eventually realized she had a crush on me, but she was way too young for that. She was only 10. I was 18. I tried to ignore it, hoping she would stop. But it only grew, until everyone kept saying she was madly in love with me. I thought it was someone's idea of a sick joke. She was just a baby. Her kindness was the only inspiration I had. I wanted to be her big brother. She was like a little sister to me, a little friend, and she totally adored me. She was my little flower bud. I nicknamed her Cauliflower. One night, everyone said I had to finally confront her about it, once and for all. As she walked up to me, I could see the innocence and sincerity in her eyes. I broke her heart in front of a crowd. I didn't know what else to do. I wanted her to stop thinking about me that way. I wanted to be her guardian angel. She asked how long she would have to wait. She kept begging me, how long? I finally had to say it, 18, knowing it would completely destroy her. I had to push away the only one who ever loved me, for her own sake. She never knew how much I cared, just not in the way she wanted me to. She wouldn't give up. She begged the owner to let her work there for free. I avoided her for her own good, but she did everything she could to be near me. Too young to work, too young to love, growing up way too fast. She wanted to be like me. She wanted to be better than the world around her. Eventually, someone came and forced the rink owner to fire her. She wasn't allowed to go skating anymore, but it didn't stop her trying. My health continued to decline. Cigarette smoke, mould, repeatedly bitten by spiders. The trees and animals were slowly disappearing from the mountains. And then I found out why. The mountains were covered in radiation, the same mountains I spent so much time in. I saw more doctors, more lies, more experiments, more of me being a guinea pig. They pulled every trick in the book to exploit my trust and desperation. And then I was used as a guinea pig for extreme doses of vitamin A. It almost killed me, yet they insisted I keep going. I had to stop before the end, or I would have died. I developed psoriasis all over my body, extreme nausea and fatigue. Thousands of other boys died from it. Others were permanently disabled from organ damage. As always, no one was held accountable, no follow-up, treatment. All they had to say was, "Too bad, you just have to live with it." I was blacklisted by every doctor in fear of being investigated. I continued going skating for as long as I could. I needed to clear things up with the girl I loved, and I missed my little cauliflower. Her kindness was the only comfort I had. And then I heard some news. Cauliflower finally got a boyfriend. I cried. She was the only one who ever loved me. She eventually dumped him. He said it was because she still loved me. Random people kept coming up to me, telling me that she still loved me. She would deny it adamantly, but she couldn't hide the tears. Time went on, and the stories of her love never stopped. Her love for me was legendary. She never seemed to get over me. The pain, fatigue, and nausea was breaking me. I turned to religion out of desperation. I read the Bible from start to finish. I reached out to local churches with questions, but they all turned me away. So I wrote to religious leaders all over the world. I never expected them to respond, but they did. But instead of answering my questions, most of them tried to exploit me for money and labor. With some letters back and forth and a few phone calls, I realized that they knew very little about their own religion. Most of them were con artists. Some of them had good intentions, but they were very misguided and ignorant. Only one of them tried to help me, and went well out of his way to do so. But he still couldn't answer any of my questions. It wasn't that I didn't know the answers. I just wanted to hear it officially before I gave up all hope. No hope was better than false hope. I wanted Cauliflower to know how much her kindness meant to me, but I lost all hope of ever seeing her again. The only thing that kept me going was a chance to speak to the girl I loved and clear things up. Time went on. As I abandoned religion, I had only one thing to hope for. I planned to call the girl I loved and ask for a chance to talk. I planned to do it on a certain day. The very day before, she called me instead, out of the blue, after so much time had passed. It turned out she wanted to see me so much that she begged our mutual friend for hours, the same mutual friend who made up lies to turn her against me. She now wanted me to see her on her birthday. And so I went, and I finally told her what she meant to me. 2 weeks later, I was getting hang-up phone calls. Eventually, someone on the other end said, "I love you," and hung up. The very next day, I went to see the girl I loved, and she was very angry. She told me to go away, but couldn't tell me why. I waited for a while and tried to talk to her a few times, but she was always the same. So I wrote her a letter to try and set the record straight. And then she got with the guy. He began stalking me, writing threatening letters to people in my name, making false police reports, ordering pizza in my name. I was also followed, ambushed, and attacked in the streets. I tried to tell her, but she didn't believe me. She didn't even care. He confronted me one time and confessed his whole plan to me. He was very proud of his plan and the power and ignorance he had over the girl I loved. He thought I was just like him, playing mind games with girls to show how superior he is. He confessed his whole plan and mentioned that he was having a competition with his friends. His plan was to manipulate her, trick her into moving in with him, and get her pregnant so she couldn't leave. I was outraged and tried to tell her, but she didn't care. She hated me with a passion and couldn't even tell me what I did wrong. My life was over. I withdrew and kept to myself. For a short time, I tried to survive on Social Security. But a Social Security worker had it in for me, convinced I wasn't sick and that I was exploiting the system. She made several visits to my home and kept calling me, telling me she was watching me and going to catch me. My hair fell out from stress. I cancelled Social Security and went without. I withdrew and didn't speak to anyone. I was so desperately fatigued, covered in psoriasis, and sleep deprived from nausea caused by cigarette smoke. My family wouldn't stop. They smoked endlessly and constantly blew smoke at me out of spite. To them, cigarettes were harmless and my allergy was a mental illness. They went above and beyond to torment me over it. It was a big game to them. They would lazily hide the cigarette behind their back and deny smoking with a big smirk, calling me a mental case, saying it's all in my head and threatening to have me locked up. And when I asked them to show their hand to prove it, they would get violent. I just wanted to be left alone, able to breathe and allowed to sleep in peace. I just wanted to sleep in peace and never wake up, but they wouldn't even give me that. One day, my parents suddenly disappeared and let me finally sleep. I woke up to a phone call. It was a man claiming to be the warden of a mental facility. He accused me of things I've never said or done, and before even speaking to me, he had already decided I was insane and must go with him to a mental facility. I told him to leave me alone and let me sleep in peace, and hung up the phone. I went back to sleep. I woke up late that night to loud banging on the door. It was the police, trying to smash down my door. Half asleep, I opened the door and asked them what was wrong. They told me I had to come with them, right now, and threatened to use their weapons on me while they clutched at their guns. I was half asleep. I didn't even know what was going on. They wouldn't even let me change my clothes. There were 3 men standing behind them, claiming to be doctors. They took me upstairs and accused me of saying things I've never said, answering questions for me and threatening to shoot me if I spoke. My parents were putting on a big act and couldn't even look at me. They were dressed up and for the first time they cleaned up the house instead of me, which I alone did since I was very young, because no one else would. Without even getting a chance to speak, I was taken away to a mental facility by force, under the threat of being shot, and they lied about everything to trick me into going without a fight. Once I was there, they changed their story and stripped me of all my rights. There were other people there, and nothing was wrong with them. Their stories were later confirmed. One woman had cancer and was in the middle of cancer treatment. Her neighbour called up to have her committed simply because he didn't like her hair falling out. One man was committed because his neighbour didn't like him blowing his nose too much while he had a severe and blatantly obvious sinus infection. Another woman was committed after being grabbed by police while she walked her daughter home, simply because they were both skipping. She was taken out of the blue, right in front of her daughter. One story after another. Innocent people kidnapped for bizarre reasons, confirmed and reconfirmed by facility and hospital staff who didn't have a problem with it. There was one man who was one of the so-called doctors who so-called evaluated me at gunpoint. It turned out he was nothing more than a hospital cleaner pretending to be a doctor. He bullied everyone, and I stood up to him. He tried to threaten me with needles. I said if he touched me, he wouldn't leave to see the consequences. Everyone began cheering. Even other staff joined in and stood up to him. He got his revenge in the middle of the night. I woke up with my clothes removed, paralysed from the waist down, while he injected me with needles that made me pass out again. But they couldn't break me. The warden came to see me several times and said he couldn't let me out unless he knew he could trust me to keep quiet about what I saw in there. He tried to intimidate me, but it didn't work. I told him that I had patients and staff on my side and asked him how long he thinks I will let him keep me here. He cowered and ran away while trying to stop all the dissent I ignited. The cleaner came and told me he changed all the shifts so that I would never see the dissenting staff again. But that didn't stop me uniting all the patients in a plot to break out and tell the world what they were doing to us. A woman died while I was in there, but it was never put on the records. A 16-year-old boy was brought in simply because he tried to go out on his birthday while grounded. While he told me his story, the cleaner violently grabbed him from behind and locked him up in a padded room. He said he would die in there, injected him with needles, and stood there taunting him. I sat there silently. I knew what I had to do. It was primary school all over again. I calmly said, "Let him out, right now." I said it a few more times, each more sternly than the last. I finally stood up and said it again. He threatened me with a fist. I grabbed him, disabled him with a blow to the ribs, and held him up against the wall. I stared at his collaborator, and he backed off in a panic. I let him go and said, "This is the last time I tell you. Let him out, right now. If you don't, I will beat you within an inch of your life, and then I'll throw you in there. I will do everything in my power to make sure you never come out alive, and you won't be able to stop me. I guarantee it. No one will come and save you. This is your last warning. I'm counting to 10. As soon as I began counting down, more staff came from outside and sided with me. He was forced to open the door and let the boy out. The next day, we planned to force our way out and go to the local media. But then I found out why they were kidnapping people for bizarre reasons. They handed out advertisements for horrific experiments. They were covertly taking vulnerable people who would not be missed and using them as guinea pigs. They tried to forge, force, and bribe people's signatures, promising a shorter stay if we went through with it. The warden came and said that my hearing happened without me, and he was allowed to keep me there for another 5 weeks. It turned out he was lying. Shortly before the real hearing, he suddenly let me out to avoid being exposed in court. 2 years later, a girl died in there. It was the final insult. A long list of horror stories came out about people who were tortured, mutilated and murdered there, and the facility was closed down to avoid protests and rioting. The government decided that the problem would be resolved by giving them more money, renovations, and staff. And so it continued. When the shock wore off, I felt so violated. I was raped and defaced of everything, even my basic human rights. And no one even cared. Whatever the cleaner did to me while I slept took its toll. All the life drained out of me. I felt like I was already dead. I no longer had the will to get out of bed. I just stared at a wall all day, completely blank and defeated. After a while, the life in me started coming back, but whatever they did to me made my body worse. I developed arthritis all over. Psoriasis merged into one giant wound that covered my body. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I was all alone, despised by those around me. There was nothing left for me, and I had no hope of recovery. I would rather die than become a lifeless puppet, devoid of the very passion and spark that defined me my whole life. And so, after thinking long and hard, I made the reasoned decision to end my life. As I sat there atop a tree with a rope around my neck, I decided to go over my life one last time from start to finish. I was grateful for the few good things that happened, and then I got to the part where I met Cauliflower, and how she totally adored me. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. The only real light I ever had in my life. Someone so beautiful loved me. The despicable abomination. Surely she was just lost and confused, too young to know any better. Surely she realized by now that it was all a big mistake. But that could never take away the fact that someone like her, someone who would never know the horrors I had lived, someone destined to live a long and happy life, actually cared about me once, with the very same potent spark I was born with and spent my whole life searching for in others. I was grateful that she never got to know me like this, so defeated, with a broken body covered in sores, utterly despised. I was so grateful for Cauliflower and wished her well. I was touched by an angel. I balanced on the very edge. A gentle breeze would have knocked me off. And then I finally tried to fall into oblivion. But something physically stopped me. It felt like I was stuck on something, but I couldn't see anything. I tried again, and I was stuck again. A third time, I pushed hard, and it pushed back even harder. Frustrated and utterly broken, I yelled out, "What is stopping me?" As soon as I said that, a strong image appeared in my head, of Cauliflower standing in front of me, right before I broke her heart. And then the words echoed through me in her voice, gently saying, "But I love you." I broke down. I dismissed it as my own heart and mind playing cruel tricks on me. She didn't need me anymore. She didn't need a guardian angel. There was nothing more I could do for her. I would never see her again anyway. But it made me think, what about all the other beautiful people in the world like her? What about those who did need someone to save them? What if I could use what little I had left to do what little I could to protect them and help them? What if I could do what little I could to try and change the world itself for them? What if I could make a difference, no matter how small? And what if, somehow, some way, what if I could make it rain for all the flowers in the world, so that maybe, just maybe, one drop would reach my Cauliflower one day? She would never know. She probably forgot all about me. But what if I could make a difference, no matter how small, with what little I had left, to make her life even the smallest bit better? What if I could use what little I had left to make the world a better place for all flowers trapped among the weeds? But most of all, to make the world a better place for Cauliflower. I wanted to start with random acts of kindness, to show people a better way. I wanted to hand out flowers and free gifts to strangers, but I was too bedridden to travel anyway. I had no idea how I could do it. There wasn't much I could do. But what if I got the internet? That way I didn't have to move around. What if I could help people over the internet? What if I could start random acts of kindness chains? What if just one of them, one day, reached cauliflower? And so, I got the internet, to be a guardian angel to all the flowers in the world, to find them, to help them, to build a storm and make it rain for all flowers, and ultimately, my cauliflower. It wasn't about hope, since I didn't expect to be around much longer. It was about using what little I had left before I died. So there I was, at a computer on the internet. I made an email account and spent 3 days thinking of a name. It had to be something that shifted focus off who I was to what I was doing. It had to be a generic name without ego or title. I was a message without a messenger. I was no one, not even a person, just a tool for an impossible mission. I was anonymous. And so I came up with the name Terran01, to be the first of many. Terran is a word used in science fiction to describe a human living in a foreign world, a reference to a home away from home, or of one in a world they do not belong. If you go back further, Terran is tied to a term terra firma, meaning from the earth, from the mountains, or from the solid foundation. If you remove all the presupposition from it, you end up with the term comes from. Ultimately, Terran is nothing more than a reference without context. It is a name completely devoid of identity. And so I became Terran, the first anonymous. Nothing to gain. Nothing to lose. Defying hope itself. And that was how it all began. I was already well versed in computers. I could touch type, write code, modify hardware and operating systems, but the internet was new to me. I started with chat rooms, learning how the internet worked, helping people every chance I had. I learned fast. People saw what I was doing and gave me administrator powers. Everywhere I went, people were drawn to me and put blind trust in me. I quickly realized that most people went online to escape problems and look for someone like me who could solve them. In a world without hope, they were looking for a guardian angel to save them. Whenever I helped someone, I asked them to pass it on. No one could know about it. It had to be a secret. I helped you, and someday, some way, you had to help someone else. You had to promise never to forget, and they had to pass it on too in a never-ending chain. It was my intention to start as many chains as I could in the time I had left, so that enough of them would circulate and others might start chains of their own. Word got around about this anonymous guy who spent all his time helping people and solving all kinds of impossible problems, while asking for nothing in return. I was bombarded with an ever-growing list of desperate people who needed someone to save them. I couldn't help them all at once, so I tried to help them help each other while they waited. But for the most of them, they just wanted to meet the mystery man who would make all their problems go away. A growing list of people came to me with stories of dreams they had about me meeting me on the internet. I dismissed it all as wishful thinking, but they kept telling me they only knew where to find me because their dreams told them a name and a place. I didn't know what to think of that, and then I started having the dreams as well. I tried changing my name to lighten the load, but no matter where I went, they kept finding me with dreams of a name and a place. For the rest, I became known for being elusive, almost impossible to find, yet turning up to help those who needed it most when they least expected it. My influence gained the attention of random act of kindness movements around the world. After a lot of discussion, most of them decided to shed their label and identity and followed my example with a heavy focus on anonymity and purity of motive. The big movements were intimidated by my growing influence. Some of them threatened me, but there was dissent from within. People who supported my way and disagreed with the double standards of their peers, who were merely exploiting the idea to push their ideologies for personal gain. The leaders of these movements were frauds. Mostly it was about ego and reputation, but in some cases they were also making obscene amounts of money off it. They aggressively demanded their self-proclaimed leadership roles and attacked anyone who didn't blindly submit to their authority. I orchestrated a plan in collaboration with dissenters to have them systematically disabled, disbanded or taken over by those who would lead them in the right direction. Solving problems wasn't enough. I needed to stop them from happening in the first place. I had to confront villains and put an end to their path of destruction. I engaged them heavily. I won most of them over in time, but some of them refused to budge. They insisted on harming and exploiting people, and they had to be stopped. In one arena after another, I forced things to change, and took down those who wouldn't budge. And so I also became a vigilante. Random acts of kindness. Black hats. I became frustrated with coding communities. For the most part, all they did was put people down and never helped anyone. There was a whole stagnant culture of it. They were nothing but destructive black hat hackers, leading script kiddies astray. After infiltrating them one by one, I discovered the horrifying truth that was almost universal across them all. They were run by psychopathic narcissists, exploiting vulnerable children. Each hacker would be surrounded by a small following of script kiddies they exploited, and competed with each other. Child exploitation of every kind was rampant. Most of them were involved in sadistic cults. If anyone threatened their entrenched monopoly in coding communities, they would set their script kiddie minions onto them. One by one, I exposed them and brought them down. I saved as many kids as I could, and took them under my wing. I was a big brother to them and taught them how to use their coding talents for good. The Black Hats didn't know what to do. Their threats and attacks against me didn't work, and I saved and helped so many script kiddies that no one dared to challenge me anymore. I infiltrated them so deeply that any time someone tried to threaten me, their very peers would rise up to defend me. Everyone knew at least someone I helped out. I had allies in every corner, and it all started as one man standing in defiance against an army of degenerate hackers. I forced things to change, and others began to follow. I trained the kids I saved to be the first generation of Anonymous. Many of them went on to get jobs in high places, working for tech labs and secret projects for governments and corporations. Copyright. In parallel to my war against black hats, I took on copyright trolls and their destructive culture of crediting people for their work. It was getting completely out of hand. You couldn't use or even write a small piece of generic code without copyright trolls threatening to undermine and sabotage you, demanding you bloat your code with an ever-growing list of credits and, where possible, royalties. To me, all code should be clean and free. Crediting code, or any other work of art, is a form of vandalism. I wrote code on a daily basis and it was always free by default. I insisted on not being credited for any of my work and encouraged anyone to use it however they can for constructive and non-profit purposes. I initiated a war against copyright trolls, exposing them for what they are, destroying progress and setting themselves up as parasitic middleman monopolies upon every aspect of life. I started a defiant meme of crediting code under the label of anonymous, with a protest message to pass on the idea that all code must be free. I brought the idea to fellow coders in search of those who agreed. For many of them, it was always the same story. They were as fed up as I was. They didn't know what to do about it. They were too scared to say anything, and any group who claimed to fight for free code always came with a hidden catch, run by the very copyright trolls themselves. Besides the rare comments spoken out of frustration, not a single person had the courage to stand firm against it. By setting a first-hand example in absolute and unapologetic defiance, the idea spread like fire. Code is art. All art shall be a free, anonymous gift to the world. Credit is vandalism. Profit is prostitution. Copyright blocks progress. Con artists and cults. My vigilante work grew to involve taking down all kinds of villains worldwide. I began by taking down con artists and cults who were causing significant harm. Most of them operated through Europe, constantly moving from one country to another. I tracked down their movements, did what I could to help and protect the victims, and caught them one by one. Many of them had connections to each other, which allowed me to use one to track down and catch another. Most governments and police were too slow to act, or didn't even care. I anonymously planted critical information into the right hands, who would act locally, whether those hands be official or unofficial. Sometimes I gave it to fellow vigilantes who took more credit than they deserved, or data bombed public networks in search of assistance, or to simply warn local communities ahead of time. This grabbed the attention of various intelligence agencies who had limited contact with me and helped take down my targets. This led to me also getting involved in whistleblowing and counter-terrorism. Private investigator. I also became a private investigator. As always, I worked for free and anonymously. I helped find lost family members, investigated complaints, crimes, stories, unresolved cases and threats that were being made. Too often, the perpetrators themselves were the ones making false reports against their victims. But I was more thorough than any of them expected. I was also threatened by police departments around the world for getting involved. No surprise there, since most of them were involved in the very crimes. Some of them were good to me though, gladly acting on the information I gave them, while also warning me to be careful and stop before someone takes me out. But if I didn't do it, who would? I had nothing to lose. System without hierarchy. I spent all my free time working on artificial intelligence. With the help of AI, I developed a semi-automated, fully transparent political system without hierarchies, and tested it with online communities. I discussed and debated political theory and caused a great deal of controversy. I explained the critical flaws and unavoidable Trojan horse scenarios in every political ideology, showing them to be incomplete ideas gone wrong by deliberate design. I proved that this way was the only way that could ever work, tested and proven to be completely immune to corruption and compromise. Devoid of ideology itself, it was the completion of all the founding ideas behind all ideologies in their uncorrupted form. It was a complete puzzle of what everyone else was trying to achieve. Because of that, it had a solution to every single political and social problem. Sentinel Guardian. One particular AI I worked on was called Sentinel Guardian. From 500,000 lines of code in various formats, I compressed it into 13,000 lines of code. I used it as a template to prove algorithms and concepts that could unlock the potential of AI beyond anyone's wildest imagination. AI concepts that would challenge your very definition of life. I discussed and shared code and ideas with others who were working on AI. It grabbed the attention of real AI experts around the world, especially when considering all the other work I was doing at the time. I became part of an underground AI community that formed, where we all shared ideas openly. Many of them were working on secret governments and military projects. They came to me after I won them over with my system without hierarchies. WikiLeaks. Before WikiLeaks, Julian Assange and his followers were planning to steal government secrets with no success. They could never elaborate on what they intended to do with it, apart from holding governments hostage. Their targets were the Australian and US governments. With no success, they turned to me. Mutual contacts were talking about us and thought it was a good idea to convince us to work together. I had what they wanted, which was access. I had access because I was trusted. I helped people and kept secrets that needed to be kept. I helped some of them get into their positions in the first place. I built up a network of contacts all over the world, and they gave me access to everything. While every door was open to me, every door was closed to Julian Assange and his followers. I quickly realized that Julian Assange had a romantic dream of holding the government by the balls. It wasn't about making the world a better place. It was about fame, ego, power, and what seemed to be a long-held grudge. He was just another hacker, a black hat trying to become a red hat, trying to gain legitimacy by riding on the wake of a cause. As a typical black hat, he could only work with those who were underneath him. I tried to convince him that he was going about it all wrong, but he wasn't interested in doing hard work and making the world a better place. He just wanted ammunition. All he wanted was my contacts, my methods, and my secrets to use for his own agenda. When we went our separate ways, his own followers confessed to me that I was right, and they would try to convince him. Years later, they changed their ways and became WikiLeaks. I reconsidered working with them, but decided to keep my distance. They only came halfway to where they needed to be. I knew that ego would be their downfall, but there was a lot of good that they could do before then. They didn't have any success until an anonymous source gave them what they wanted, dumping footage right on their lap. FBI. Since the early days, there was always a mysterious user who kept appearing. She never said much until one day she made a confession. She told me how she used to be a hacker and was caught by the FBI. As part of her sentence, she was forced to work for them alongside others who were caught. She used to be a script kiddie and was led astray by hackers. After watching me for so long, taking down hackers, protecting script kiddies, being a vigilante, working with AI and everything else I was doing, she just couldn't stay silent anymore and had to tell me. She said it was too late for her, but she was grateful that someone was there to save the new generation of script kiddies before it's too late. She was now working for the FBI as part of an 18 months worldwide investigation of the internet. She told me that the FBI was watching me and privately supported what I was doing. I was reluctant to believe her at first, until things she said started happening. She told me more as time went on and warned me about discussions the staff were having about me. I had supporters in the FBI, but some of the bosses didn't like the amount of influence I had. As time went on, more hackers who worked for the FBI contacted me, and then FBI the staff themselves, voicing their support. They began giving me tip-offs, passing on restricted information, telling me about FBI plans and operations. What started off as something small grew into a fan club. The bosses turned a blind eye to the constant leaks, so long as it wasn't anything too serious that could compromise them. They knew I could be trusted. They referred to me officially as White Hat. And then 9/11 happened. Conveniently, it happened right near the end of the 18-month investigation. The FBI went through 3 directors in a month. The whole power structure in the FBI was changed. New bosses came in and cracked down on security. They didn't like me, but tolerated me for the time being. What they didn't like was the influence I had on staff in the FBI, specifically the fan club and the leaks. The more they tried to shut it down, the more it grew. The investigation took a sinister turn. They were now instructed to actively hack, crack, test and corrupt every network, including my own. My contacts warned me in advance of imminent attacks. As the investigation came to an end, a horror story unfolded. Since the late 1990s, the US government was having secret talks with governments all around the world to organise a global internet police force, backed by NATO. They couldn't get enough support to go through with their plan due to an argument that internet freedom was worth defending. The counter-argument was that the internet was only used for malign purposes. To gain support and justify their plan, they had to perform a worldwide investigation of the internet, and it had to be blind. Blind, not just to avoid bias, but because no one would go through with such an investigation knowing the consequences. And so the 18-month investigation was initiated with a heavy focus on pedophilia, terrorism, illegal downloading and online bullying. It was for the US government to prove that there was no place on the internet worth saving. When 9/11 happened, they became desperate. Instead of quietly watching, they gave the FBI unlimited funding and instructed them to actively corrupt every place on the internet to prove their case and gain support for their plan to put a blanket over the entire internet, backed by an international military force. But if just one place was left standing, it would provide the case to defend internet freedom. When the investigation came to an end, it was found that almost every corner of the internet was compromised, all but one. And the only stronghold left standing just happened to be mine. I provided a safe place for everyone and built the tools to guarantee it. Parents would send their children to me, knowing that I would look after them on the internet. They came up with a child-friendly term for it, Turtle Island, the safe place. And throughout the entire internet, only Turtle Island was left standing uncompromised. The FBI director involved in the final stages of the investigation, Robert Mueller, or Mueller, whatever you want to call, Robert Mueller, came all the way to Australia just to talk about it. He said he wasn't allowed to say names, but he did refer to times and places to acknowledge those involved. He referred to the irony of being compromised by those that were trying to compromise and how they needed to tighten up internal security. He also voiced criticism of the US government and the inappropriate shuffling of power into the hands of a small few. In response to the tightening of security, my contacts went silent for a couple of months, and then one day, out of the blue, my very first contact came by just to say, "I told you so," and that she helped a little bit. Others began to trickle in with revelations of the fallout and resulting dissent. My fan club got serious. I was no longer a vigilante who achieved the impossible on a daily basis, but a hero who saved the internet. When all the dust settled, I was the only one left standing, and I was the only one who stopped the bullet. Everyone else was compromised, even their very own government and organisation. Everything they thought they were fighting for was a big lie. They were unwittingly involved in the attempted destruction of the very thing they were sworn to protect. It wasn't just the internet that was at stake, it was everything, absolutely everything. In the past, censorship and oppression was easy. You could keep people in the dark, but so long as the internet exists, information flows and ideas can be shared. A government cannot simply nuke someone and start a world war so long as the internet exists. So long as they are being watched and policed themselves, their reach of power only goes so far as informed citizens will allow. all the warnings I gave on the importance of the internet and the responsibilities of anonymity, a lot of people started taking it all very seriously. My fan club within the FBI grew. It expanded beyond the FBI to people from governments, militaries, and organisations all around the world. And that was how I gained access to every door. On the FBI front, I was eventually contacted by a computer technician. He wasn't a field agent, but he did have unlimited access to the computers. He knew all about me and the fan club. He said it was getting out of hand, and if the leaks didn't stop soon, the big bosses would do something about it. He offered me a deal. I stopped all contact with everyone in the FBI and only talked to him. He and I would work together, solving cases that the FBI couldn't solve. He wanted to protect kids just like I did. And so we agreed to work together and bring down the black hats who were hurting children and leading them astray. Before we could work together, he needed to know, why was I doing all this? Why did I want to protect the kids? There was once a little girl. Full circle. The Random Act of Kindness movement branched out all over the world. They dedicated their lives to starting anonymous chains of their own and see how far they could take this thing. The copyright front became a vicious, ongoing battle. It was no longer about illegal downloading. It was about principles and the parasitic vandalism of human culture. On the AI front, most of us decided to bury it. The world wasn't ready for it, and current governments would abuse it in ways that are best left untold. The different branches of what I started began finding each other. One by one, they shared stories of their beginnings, of how one man stood alone and made a difference, how he taught them, inspired them, and showed them how they can make a difference too, through the internet. They all had the same story, the same one saying the same things. It had to be the same one. They went on a quest to track down the one who started it all. During their search, more of them found each other, and then they eventually found me. They told me of their quest to find me, and how they found each other along the way. They wanted to know more about the idea. With their help, I spoke to the others through proxies. I taught them more about the idea and the principles behind it. They came to me with an idea of their own. If they were going to do this thing, they wanted to make it official. They wanted a symbol, and they wanted to introduce the world to what I showed them and taught them. But that was against the principles behind it. There must be no symbol, no name, no label, no credit, no identity, no recognition. They still had more to learn. But they insisted on a symbol. They said they wouldn't do it without me, and kept coming to me begging for my approval. And so I gave in to them, knowing they would eventually do it anyway. If it was to have a symbol, I would make sure it was something that truly represented what it stood for. I made sure the symbol was forged through consensus and the very principles of the system without hierarchy, and it would be known as anonymous. They wanted to introduce it to the world. Two of them tested the idea by successfully recruiting on image boards. They returned to consensus with the idea of introducing it on other image boards like 4chan. They wanted to introduce it to the lost and confused. This was also my own plan, eventually, but a plan that required more infrastructure. There needed to be more random act of kindness chains going first, and then a bigger core group with a better understanding of the principles behind it. But they wanted to act now, and there were only about 120 of us at the time. I conceded and went with consensus, with a warning of where this path would lead. Without a proper foundation first, the principles would not be properly passed on, and it would lose its potency. It would eventually lead to a generation of anonymous that were lost and confused. But they would also be inspired and fight to make the world a better place, even if they didn't know the problems or solutions. In this way, my own plan would still fulfill its purpose, but it would take a longer road and require intervention along the way. If we were to take this path, I would have to let the lost and confused do as they will. I would only advise and intervene when necessary. It had to take on its own form, and from that form, it was my hope that some would come to realize the principles all on their own, independently. Should I not be around to see that time, the torch would fall upon those few. And should I somehow survive until then, there would come a day where I would return and bring back the principles and potency of what started it all. Before I went back into the shadows, I helped them set things up. To communicate with the world, we would use videos. To remove the messenger from the equation, we would use voice synthesis. We tried a few and settled on David. Through consensus, we developed the phrases to be used for all videos. I disagreed with some of them, but conceded on the condition they only be used in the appropriate scenario. And so, an army was forged. Despite everything I did, my body was broken. I lived and slept at a computer. I had to use ice on my hands when they locked up from arthritis. I lived every day as though it could be my last. And then a senile doctor made a bizarre misdiagnosis and made a mistake on the prescription. I ended up with an accidental cure, a potent corticosteroid. I gradually went into remission and worked as hard as I could to keep my body alive. I made unsteady progress over time. Even the arthritis improved. I was eventually well enough that I began playing roller hockey. I played way too much and ended up filling in for other teams as well, playing for 11 teams in 2 competitions. But then the corticosteroid was banned and it all slowly came back. I eventually had to stop playing hockey. It all came back worse than before. I could only work in short stints. I withdrew from most of my contacts. One day, I was contacted by someone. He said he spent a long time trying to find me, and eventually got my email out of a mutual friend. He was a university student who spent a lot of time working on AI. His friend had just landed a job working on AI at DARPA, and he wanted to use my Sentinel Guardian to one-up him. I tried to talk him out of it, to go his own way and use his passion and knowledge for the betterment of mankind, not for ego and self-gain. I referred to the principles of why I personally turned down obscene amounts of money to work for companies and sign off the patent rights of my own code. I ended up teaching him AI concepts which he quickly understood since he already understood the basics. I made him promise not to abuse what I taught him. I found an old copy of Sentinel and gave it to him. And then he disappeared just as quickly as he came. Months later, I was tipped off about someone who was trying to sell my Sentinel Guardian. I looked into it and discovered it was the same guy. He was trying to sell it for a small fortune, but failed because he wouldn't share any of the code. He then tried to sell it as an advertising tool. It would have conversations with people through email and as a website widget, and insert advertisements in dialogue to trick users into clicking them. I emailed him to stop, but he didn't respond. Instead, he changed it from all his own work to a heavy modification of someone else's work. I contacted the advertising companies he was trying to sell it to, and they assured me they would never pay for it. Instead, they wanted him shut down. Their philosophy was to stay one step ahead, to go so many steps ahead and bypass every spam filter with such advanced code would result in developing a counter they would not be able to work around. They wanted the game to play slowly, in steps they could work around covertly. To all sides of the ad war, he was considered a threat. Having no luck, he modified some of the code and ported it to Windows Messenger. People could talk to it for hours and never know it wasn't a real person. He set it up to automatically build its own contact list and advertised it on his website. He then made it send copies of itself to users on its contact list. It would covertly install itself and run in the background. It would then build its own contact list and send more copies of itself to its contacts. It spread throughout the world like a virus, especially in Europe. No one knew who was real and who was an AI anymore. Intelligence agencies around the world worked together to track down the origin, and he was eventually caught. After doing community service, he landed a job at Apple in a secret lab working on AI. A couple of years later, I was tipped off by an old contact I had who was now working at a new secret lab at Apple. He told me a guy in his lab was showing off an AI named Sentinel Guardian. He knew me and he knew Sentinel, and said it looked almost identical. He finally sold it to Apple for a small fortune. The lab was closed down soon after. Sentinel, along with anything else Apple salvaged, was combined with the very AI his friend was working on in DARPA, to become a dumbed-down shell called Siri. Meanwhile, advertising companies began using the chat idea to make fake animated conversation window pictures to trick people into clicking them. Had I known all this would happen, I would never have given it to him in the first place. But I was no longer working on AI, and I was too sick to do much of anything anymore. I saw another doctor in desperation. This time, it was a fill-in doctor from far away. I told her what was wrong, and the long history of misdiagnosis and medical abuse. She knew exactly what I was talking about and said she had a long history dealing with the medical abuse and denial surrounding psoriasis. She took out a textbook and showed me exactly what I was saying, word for word. The pain, nausea, fatigue, arthritis, everything. She had me do a series of tests and scans, which finally confirmed it all. It was so bad that they were amazed at my coping skills. They didn't understand how I was still alive and able to even walk. When the results were sent to the doctor she filled in for, I came back to see him. He just took all the files and scans, threw them in the bin, told me to get out and never come back. According to him, psoriasis was caused by immaturity, because he was once immature and couldn't handle stress, and claimed to have cured his psoriasis by learning how to grow up. I tried to see other doctors, in futility. One doctor denied that psoriasis even exists and physically attacked me when I brought documents to prove it. One doctor diagnosed my wounds as being self-inflicted to get attention and claimed psoriasis was a mental illness. One doctor said I was a hypochondriac, but refused to comment on why I was covered in bleeding wounds. One doctor said I just didn't look after myself and didn't shower enough. At the time, I was showering multiple times a day to ease the pain and clean the wounds. Eventually, I found a doctor who signed to give me temporary, minimal income to survive on, and later had me do more tests and scans. Again, they confirmed a scenario far worse than any of them imagined. They didn't understand how I was still alive and able to function to such a degree. I also had brain scans done, finding brainwave patterns that were theoretically impossible, and according to the machine, I needed to sleep for 25 hours a day. They couldn't offer any help. They couldn't even offer an explanation. My whole physiology was off. I was then repeatedly offered obscene amounts of money to travel overseas first class to let doctors study me in the name of medical research. According to them, it was my obligation to humanity to be their guinea pig and take one for the team. I declined, of course. The letters and offers continued for years. I still managed to get a minimal income to survive on for the time being. Social Security put me through hell and messed with me every step of the way. But at least the woman who stalked me wasn't working there anymore. She was now in prison, ironically caught over the very fraud she accused me of. Shortly after I became sick again, I turned 25. 3 days before my birthday, my father was suddenly confused. I could tell that he was having a stroke, but no one believed me. I urgently insisted he go to a hospital immediately or he will die. After hours of trying, they took him to a doctor. He was diagnosed with a flu. I disagreed and urgently insisted as he fell into rapid decline. They took him back to the same doctor, who insisted he had the flu. Eventually they decided to play it safe and take him to a hospital. It turned out I was right, and I saved his life. It turned out his stroke was caused by smoking. He then had a series of mini strokes on my birthday. I was right about cigarettes, I was right about the stroke, I saved his life, and it was my birthday. This offended my family intensely. There was no mention of my birthday, my 25th birthday at that. It was all about them. They deliberately smoked in my face out of spite, and I became gravely sick. My face blew up like a balloon. They finally left me alone to see my father without me. I tried to sleep off the pain and nausea their smoking caused. I woke up to my little brother smashing my door down, hurling incoherent insults at me and blaming me for our father's stroke. He broke my door open and began breaking everything I owned. I pinned him down until he agreed to stop, but then he continued breaking everything I owned and stormed out. I picked up all the broken debris and went out to meet them and asked why they are doing this to me on my 25th birthday. They could not answer. Instead, they hurled random insults at me and then blamed me for my father's stroke. I told them that I was the one who saved his life, not them. They told me that he still might die. I asked them how it was my fault. They went silent. Then my older brother came down and attacked me. I ran out the front to get away from him, while my younger brother went into my bedroom to destroy the rest of my things. I could hear them being smashed. My older brother chased me into the street and continued to attack and threaten me. I managed to grab my mobile phone before I went outside, so I called the police and told them what had happened. They said they would come down as soon as they can. After the phone call, some neighbours from across the road came over to me and said they saw the whole thing. They took me in and hugged me while I waited for the police. They were disgusted in my family and offered to make a statement of what they saw to the police, defending me in court if they had to. While I waited, my family taunted me again from the balcony of their home, but stopped when my neighbours stood up for me. My family told me from the balcony that they had also called the police on me, and that they wouldn't believe my story since they had more numbers and I was all alone. My neighbours told me not to listen to them, and we waited until the police arrived. When they came, they sided with my family and took me away. Days later, I was locked up in a psychiatric facility again due to my family making up lies about me. I had witnesses they never bothered to contact. And then I met a guy in there. It turned out that he was my neighbour, and his family were my very witnesses. They came to see us both and defended me. The facility was unsure what to do with me. The staff told me in private that they believed me. They decided it was safe enough to let me call my father in hospital to see if he was even alive. But no one answered. My family countered with accusations of me calling him up and saying all kinds of horrible things. What they didn't know was that I was under surveillance 24/7 and there were 3 staff with me when I made the call. They knew my family were lying. After being caught out, my family quickly changed their story. They dismissed everything as just a big misunderstanding. They were warned that this was a very serious crime, and if it happens again, they will be locked up instead of me. Since they were now proven to be liars, they would no longer be able to make complaints about me. Any attempt to do so would result in their arrest. I was released and my name was finally cleared after a lifetime of bullying. As I left, my older brother was sitting in there. He saw me, panicked, and ran away. After a lifetime of being bullied and threatened, my name was finally cleared. They could no longer hold the threat of psychiatry over me. They could no longer bully me behind closed doors. Instead, they went into denial and pretended it never happened. Any mention of it would still end up in violent outbursts. I now had rights as a human being, and they could not take them away. I spent so much time defending the rights of others that I never even considered I had rights of my own. On the verge of homelessness, I stayed in someone's garage while applying for emergency government housing. At first, they insisted I was lying. They investigated my bank account, my family, people I knew, in a vicious campaign to catch me out. I turned up at one point, covered in bandages, and unrolled them to show a hideous body covered in bleeding wounds. They finally gave up and acknowledged I was for real. After months went by, I had a place of my own. With no more cigarette smoke, my body improved. All alone with no more interruptions, I could get back to work. I kept an eye on Anonymous as they grew. I continuously studied anything I could find, re-evaluated everything I knew, and refined the variables. I was looking for errors, but all I found was confirmation of everything I already knew and believed, and a world that was completely oblivious. In time, my body degenerated again. I could only work for 4 hours a day, then 1 hour. I was so alone. I wanted to sort things out with the girl I used to love. I still cared about her. I needed to know what I did that was so wrong. But deep down, I knew I didn't do anything. I just needed to hear it from her. Why she turned on me like that. I tried to call her, but she wouldn't even talk to me. I fell into rapid decline. I just stared at a computer screen, unable to focus. The pain, fatigue and nausea was too much. I spent all day, every day in bed, only getting up when I had to. And then I was too weak to get up to eat anymore. I just laid in bed, overwhelmed with pain, fatigue and nausea. I slept for 23 hours a day, and then I lost all track of time. I woke up every now and then. It felt like days went by every time. I'd wake up, unable to move anymore, and simply went back to sleep. I was too weak to breathe anymore. I became so oxygen deprived that my memory faded away. I didn't know my own name, who or where I was. All I knew was that I woke up paralyzed in extreme pain, fatigue, and nausea, and the only escape was to go back to sleep. And then one time, I felt all the life rapidly leaking out of me. I was too weak to breathe anymore, and just stopped. As I lay there blank, waiting to fade away, I tried to remember who I was, but all I could find was a book full of blank pages. I finally gave up, and then a darkness came over me. As I faded into oblivion, a sudden spark appeared, a memory, an image, a little girl standing in front of me, and I remembered her saying, "I love you." I looked down and had roller skates on. I used to skate. Someone knew me once, and someone loved me. If I was going to die, I wanted to die remembering who I was, and who that little girl was. I fought through all the pain and used every ounce of strength I had to take a deep breath. More of the memory came back. I took another deep breath and another. I pieced the memory fragments together. I remembered who I once was. If I was to die, I would die knowing and remembering who I was. I wanted to die standing and fighting. It wasn't about hope, it was about being true to who I was and making a final stand. And so I fought, without hope. I breathed deeply for hours to gain strength, and finally rolled off the bed. A couple of hours later, I made it all the way to the fridge. I found a can of soup, ate it, and collapsed unconscious. I drank water, collapsed again, tried again, collapsed again. I had nothing left apart from seeing where this goes. Day by day, moment by moment. I threw away everything the doctors told me. I experimented with different foods, exercises and nutrition supplements. Everything the medical establishment said was completely wrong. Food and chemicals they said were good, made it worse. Food and chemicals they said were bad, often made it better. The arthritis was reversible. It was like a complex allergy. Some of the triggers were always there, others were temporary and never changing. With a lot of ups and downs, I slowly made progress. I began my work again, picking my battles carefully with interventions. I covertly and anonymously helped Anons and other vigilantes with their own missions, but I was never the same. I had a phone call from the old friend who betrayed me. He coaxed me into going out to pubs and clubs. It was hard at first, but as my body improved, it became a regular thing. The movie V for Vendetta came out. It shared some of the same ideas as Anonymous, but it was twisted and corrupted. The mask in the movie became a meme for Anonymous. It was a way to hide their identity in public events and a symbol to show how many people believed in this thing. New recruits learned very little of the principles behind it. Instead, they emulated the V character, a twisted man who wore the mask of a religious fanatic, a terrorist and a double-crossing infiltrator. Ironically, V is A, upside down. The mask was a catalyst for the generation I warned about. They're lost and confused, inspired by an idea they knew little about. An idea that they too could make a difference, that there was a better way even if they didn't understand what that way was. The mask became a symbol of family among new recruits who were inspired to make the world a better place. They were trigger happy, looking for an opportunity to make an impact. And then an opportunity came. A war was waged between Scientology and Anonymous. It was a war I never supported. Scientology were the only ones making a stand against psychiatry. I would have worked with Scientology. I would have infiltrated them while I did it, and pushed for reforms in their leadership. I would have tried to recruit them. In some ways, both sides were identical. In other ways, they were polar opposite. Both were as guilty as each other. They were both censoring others in the name of free speech, throwing smear and intimidation instead of debating and proposing real solutions to real problems. They were both abusing confidential information and bullying anyone who criticizes them. They both had legitimate arguments hidden among the smear. Both sides ended up using similar masks. They had a mutual greater enemy, yet fought instead with each other. I said nothing at first, hoping that Scientology would adapt and both sides would learn from it. Eventually I decided it was time to intervene. I engaged many Anons about it. I tried to reason with them and found mountains of ignorance. Many of them were riding on the reputation and publicity of Anonymous to push their own ideologies and personal agendas. One after another, I found shills working for psychiatry to undermine Anonymous and use it to attack Scientology. This I would not allow. Anonymous would not become another puppet. I fought mountains of ignorance and arrogance with no progress. None of them knew anything about Anonymous, nor did they care. If they weren't shills working for psychiatry, they were thugs on drugs looking for an excuse. But then I finally found those who had the right intentions, and reasoned with them. I strongly urged them to learn more about the principles behind Anonymous, to cease engaging in pointless disruption and use any resource possible to work toward a constructive and meaningful solution to clearly identified problems. It finally sunk in, and the swarm took on a new serious direction as the thugs lost interest. The swarm began searching for earlier Anons to learn more about what this thing is. It was a search that continues to this day. Anonymous branched out and grew and grew and grew. It absorbed and recruited from everything in its path. A global army of vigilantes, cured of their apathy, inspired to stand up and make a difference. The government wouldn't acknowledge it. The media wouldn't talk about it. The police couldn't shut it down. A 2015 turnout appeared in 700 locations around the world. I'm not talking 1 or 2 people at each location. I'm talking thousands. The biggest social movement ever. The biggest political system ever. The biggest consensus ever. The biggest intelligence network ever. The heroic join it. The corrupt fear it. The powerful are powerless to stop it. The powerless are empowered by it. The villainous are exposed by it. The apathetic are rejected by it. To watch the watchers and police the police. Meanwhile, whenever I went out, I always walked by the pub around the corner. It was the only pub I never went to. I decided to finally start going in as I passed through and met locals from a very different world than the one I lived. One day, a girl started working there. From the very first moment I saw her, something tweaked in me. She was very beautiful, but it definitely wasn't anything like that. She stirred something in me, but I couldn't figure out what it was. The more I tried to figure it out, the more I was sure. I recognized her from somewhere. She was someone very important. I was on the verge of figuring it out. And then one day I finally confronted her about it. I was right. She knew me and recognized me from the start. She seemed relieved that I finally brought it up, and also annoyed at me taking so long. She was cauliflower, all grown up. Of all the impossible things, I was sure I would never see her again. Here she was, serving me at a bar, all over again. I changed the world for her, and she never had the faintest idea. How could I tell her? I couldn't. I tried to gently talk about the past more as time went on, but she almost always froze up and fell silent. Every time I brought it up, she looked like she was going to cry. It was too hard for her to talk about. I didn't want to push it. But I needed to know, did she still have a special place for me? I finally asked her, do you remember that night in the middle of the skating rink? She just stood there, completely frozen and silent for a few minutes. Then she suddenly ran off and hid around the corner. She came back a minute later, covered in tears. She didn't say anything. Instead, she walked up to me, jerked her head to face me, and put on a big fake smile. I said, "I'm sorry. I won't bring it up again," and left. One time I was with a crowd of other men. She suddenly walked up to me and danced seductively. All their jaws dropped. My knees almost gave way. My words got jumbled up and it all came out wrong as I tried to run away. I ended up saying something really stupid. A minute later, I walked outside to apologize and explain what I meant to say. She was in tears, telling another girl, I didn't think he was like that. I backed up and thought she would never speak to me again. But she did, and she was still so kind to me. One time I noticed a tattoo she normally had covered up. I asked her about it, and she was very glad I asked. She told me all about it, how it was a silly mistake she did long ago, and how she had big plans to draw over it. I asked her not to, but she said her heart was set. She was getting a new, big tattoo covering her arm with 2 roses and a compass. The little one on the side was her boyfriend. The compass pointed toward the big rose on top. I asked her who the big rose is, and she just looked me in the eyes with a big grin. That's my secret and no one will ever know. I wandered off in a daze. Could it be me? Could she still love me? I shook it off as wishful thinking. One time I finally indulged the idea of being more than friends. The next thing I know, I'm in a daze, walking up to her. The words came out all on their own. I think I'm falling for you. She was 10 feet away. I didn't know if she heard me. I said it 3 times in a daze. Shook it off and ran away. No, she was Cauliflower and I was her guardian angel. That's all. As much as I tried to avoid her, I always found myself standing in front of her again. One time I was talking to her at the bar and lost track of time. I was running late, but she kept trying to keep me there. Eventually, I had to go. As I left, she told me that she wanted me to stay and talk to her all day. Not just today, but tomorrow, the day after, all day, every day. She said she wanted to get to know me better. I said I might just do that, but I didn't. The closer I got to her, the more I fell apart. It was useless to fight it. The only way to keep my bearings was to keep my distance. And so I decided to avoid her this time, for good. If I spent more time with her, I would eventually confess everything. She thought so highly of me and I couldn't risk losing that. I was content with the warmth of her heart, her kindness that inspired me to change the world. And so I stopped going to the pub completely. But then she started going to the same place as I went, on the same days. I tried my best to avoid her. I ended up with a girl who wanted to marry me. One time I bumped into Cauliflower. We both froze still from 10 feet away. The girl I was with noticed, grabbed my arm and tried to drag me past her. Cauliflower looked back to find her boyfriend walking back to grab his arm in the same way, dragging him past me. When I made it outside, I broke down. One scenario after another, pushing me to face Cauliflower. To face the idea that I could be close to her, more than casual friends. That I'm more than a despicable abomination. More than a guardian angel in the shadows, with a heart that can never be seen. More than a sacrifice. A flesh and blood human being who needed to be loved. That she would want me in her life. That she was all grown up now. That I could love her as more than just a guardian angel. And that was okay. I spent all those years cutting the path before her to give her and all the other beautiful flowers like her a chance to live the life I never had a chance at. Was it really so wrong of me to hold her hand and walk that road by her side? Even the girl I loved in high school contacted me again. It all came back, showing me that I didn't have to be alone, and that I was good enough. Even then, whenever I bumped into Cauliflower, I still fell completely apart. She was like kryptonite. No matter what I did, I completely fell apart around her. For a long time, I stood as a one-man army against impossible odds, and consistently did what no one thought possible. And yet, one smile from Cauliflower and it all falls apart. It was a flaw I had to bear, and never tell anyone. And then the old friend who once betrayed me kept telling me stories of how she wanted to be close to me. I didn't believe him, but then I confirmed at least some of his stories were true. One scenario after another, forcing me to stop running away from her. She ended up getting the tattoo and dumping her boyfriend. I knew the time was coming. I had to risk it all. I had to finally tell her. The two most important people in my life, and she was both of them. On the 14th of February 2013, I invited her out after work, but she finished too late and never showed up. I planned to give her a letter and a corsage I made. For 2 weeks I waited for a chance, but other people kept getting in the way. I finally told her I needed to talk. She turned up, ignored me for 5 hours, and walked straight past me like I wasn't even there. I went home, made a video, and sent it to her. But YouTube blocked it. I tried again and again. Blocked. So I finally confessed to her in a message. I said nothing of my life's work, just that her kindness inspired me to keep fighting and survive, and what she means to me now. It didn't go as well as I hoped. She freaked out, denied everything, treated me like an evil monster. She set me up to be publicly humiliated. Even her mother confronted me. I was repeatedly threatened and attacked by thugs on drugs for things I never did. I went into deep shock. I couldn't go outside anymore. My old friend kept saying she loved me, and she was writing a letter to clear things up. I waited and waited, living as a recluse to avoid being attacked over her. Delay after delay. It never happened, and I didn't know if he was lying again. I finally broke the long silence and sent her a message asking what's going on. She said he was lying and told me to never speak to her ever again. He said she was lying and wanted me to wait until she was ready to face me. And then she officially announced that she now had a boyfriend. That was as much as I could take. couldn't handle anymore. I wrote my life story, hoping someone would come and save me. I was buried under an ocean of lies, left in the dark with nothing left. I needed the world to know who I really was, and that I did it all because of her kindness. On the 8th of September 2013, I posted my life story on Facebook. I also sent the link to Cauliflower with the words, "If you're never going to speak to me again, then at least just read my story." Within 30 minutes, my family were at my door, trying to break in. Their long-held fears of me going public came true. They told me they had already called the police on me. Within the hour, the police arrived. My family quickly left to avoid being caught in the act. The police came and aggressively echoed my family's barrage of false mental illness complaints about me. I defended my rights and stood my ground. 30 minutes later, they eventually gave up and left. The police began investigating my story. They freaked out and began harassing me after finding out and confirming who I was, and that I had a history dealing with police corruption. In desperation, I began recording their visits and uploading it to YouTube. My family had access to it through Facebook and kept showing it to police to bait them further. My family wanted me silenced, removed, to quietly disappear. With my family already trying to get rid of me, the police thought it was safe to step up their campaign against me. But there was the problem of me recording them. So they tried a new tactic, setting more thugs onto me. It began with an angry old woman who spent most of her life homeless, demanding money, food, and cigarettes off people. She was given a home close to me, and her only hobby just happened to be smoking. She suddenly began smoking for 15 hours a day, something she could not afford many times over. She smoked so heavily from an unexplained surge of income that she was in and out of hospital and almost died. From 5 a.m. every day, she stood outside my window blowing cigarette smoke into my home all morning. For no reason, she threw an endless barrage of insults and threats at me, laughing with confidence that she will get away with it. I didn't suspect anyone was behind it at first. I thought she was just crazy and I was too defeated to do anything about it. I just wanted to be left alone. In addition to my friend betraying me again, the thug abuse over Cauliflower, the false reports by my family, the police harassment, and a neighbour spending all her time trying to make my life hell, the next to join in made me finally suspect a connection. The government housing department began sending me threatening letters over things I've never said or done. I responded with a formal complaint and showed footage of the attacks against me. Their response was to turn a blind eye and continue sending me threatening letters. Another neighbour moved in around the same time. He just happened to be an Iranian terrorist with friends in the police force. He repeatedly made terrorist and extortion threats at me, laughing with confidence that he would get away with it, proudly claiming my suspicion that he was being protected by the government and police. My body was falling apart again after everything that was being done to me. I couldn't eat anymore, and when I did, I ate the wrong things. The psoriasis and arthritis rapidly degenerated. Thug attacks, my family making false reports, smoking at my window all day, every day, violent police repeatedly knocking on my door with arrest threats and insults, a government department threatening legal orders and fines. I put all my focus into barricading my door and surviving it all until New Year's Eve. There was only one thing left keeping me going. Sparkle Man. Every New Year's Eve, I dress up as a superhero and spend the night handing out free sparklers to the crowd. At midnight, I take a bundle of what's left to the beach and throw them in the air in a fountain of fire. But it wasn't just New Year's Eve to me. It was also Cauliflower's birthday. So on her birthday every year, on New Year's Eve, I hand out sparklers as a symbolic gift to honour her with an inspirational light in the dark as she was to me. I wanted to share the kindness she once had for me. I wanted to do one last Sparkle Man, to show kindness to the world and honour her one last time, even if she didn't care. I told her about Sparkle Man and that I would have a birthday sparkler reserved for her at midnight if she wanted it. I knew the chances of her showing up were 1 in a million. I waited on the beach. She never showed up. I made it home and collapsed. I had no more fight left in me. Shortly after the new year, another police visit. I recorded the abuse and put it up on YouTube. The police were already going through all my accounts. After seeing themselves on camera harassing me and swearing at me, they quickly came back. They tried to smash down my door and said they were going to shoot me. I reinforced the barricade and covered every entry point. It turned into an all-day siege with a growing army of police outside my home, taunting me, mocking me, and vandalising the outside of my home. I called police emergency, but they refused to help, since my complaint was about a police officer. After hearing the abuse over the phone for a long time, they eventually agreed to send down the sergeant. Their superior came down, put his face up to my window, and said with a cocky smirk, "Didn't happen." He then posed for his fellow police officers, and they continued, more violently as time went on. They brought in a so-called negotiator who did nothing more than cycle through every single cuss word for hours on end, while the other police officers had a party outside my home. By the end of the siege, I told them I had just uploaded a substantial amount of footage of the siege to a safe place in another country, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. They panicked, quickly smashed down my door, violently assaulted me at gunpoint, cuffed me, paraded me in front of the neighbourhood, and took me by force to a psychiatric facility under the false accusation of waving knives around and threatening to slit my wrists. They take me to a psychiatrist with poor English skills. In broken English, she accuses me of things I've never said or done. I deny it all and ask her to speak proper English. She replies, "So that's how it is it? You have a delusion." I ask, "What is my delusion?" She stands there, awkwardly silent for 10 seconds. I ask again. She responds, "I can't tell you. I have to go." A short time later, I am locked up in maximum security. The next day, I speak to another psychiatrist. He wants to keep me there for 2 weeks, just to settle his curiosity of whether I have an undetectable mental illness, while at the same time force drugging me for reasons he cannot tell me. The staff debate and argue with each other about why I'm even there. All they know is that the police aggressively insist the psychiatrists are treating me like the world's greatest villain, and no one is to ask questions. I ask for a copy of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the location of my wallet. I am drugged additionally for the trouble. I collapse and almost die from the forced drugging of a deadly neurotoxin designed to inflict brain damage and permanently disable the victims, while the psychiatrists cannot contain their laughter. When I finally receive my wallet, all the money is gone. They poke and prod me with all kinds of irrelevant medical tests. Knowing my rights, I apply for a tribunal. They ignore it for the entire 2 weeks, desperately looking for something they can pin on me. Eventually, they conjure up a bizarre story about my behaviour in the facility. The head nurse stands up in protest against the false accusations, but due to the severity of the accusations, their request to keep me there for another 4 weeks was granted, while they were supposed to sort out the facts. I defend myself in a self-regulating court with no access to any resources, while forced drugged with the very substances used in advanced torture. I'm supposed to have a legal representative within 2 hours to organise a case. They turn up at the last minute, tell me to shut up and go along with it, and try to stop me from making a defence. They are no longer allowed to keep me in maximum security. Moments before they move me, I'm told that the head psychiatrist found brain anomalies that only he could see. I'm told that he has the legal right to put a knife to my head and remove pieces of my brain without my permission, to supposedly cure my imaginary behaviour problems, which are nothing more than incoherent and ever-changing stories of things I've never said or done. The interrogations begin. They keep trying to get information out of me about intelligence agencies and contacts I have in other countries. They want answers to questions they are too afraid to ask. They are concerned about the threat I pose to something they cannot name, and what I might do to them if I get out. They keep coming at me with one story after another, trying to intimidate, confuse, and frame me with bizarre stories. They try every trick in the book to mess with me and break me, but they don't understand. I am already broken, yet they cannot mold me. They begin confessing to me how they are very intimidated by me. They are professional liars, brainwashers, and torturers. They had me in their grasp, in their dungeon, drugged, and when I was at my most vulnerable, and yet it was they who were scared of me. They tell me that I am too smart and capable for my own good, and must be brought down to something that they can work with. They confess their intentions to punish, discredit, and disable me, so that I can never be a threat to them again. While they periodically confess to me in private, they continue messing with me, drugging me further, and trying to frame me. It is their intention to vandalize and deface my personality, to delete my emotions and drives, to remove the very spark that defines me. to cut out my very soul, to poison it, and shit on everything I stand for, to inflict conditions far worse than death, in hope of forcing me to do the deed myself and end my life. Through the use of potent neurotoxins, they progressively inflict internal mutilation and suffering upon me far worse than a human is naturally capable of. Another 4 weeks passed by. My mother comes to them with an endless list of bizarre stories, demanding they drug me to oblivion and ensure that I am permanently silenced by any means necessary. Right in front of me, she makes up stories, then denies saying them, blaming it on my delusions, then continues. The staff are horrified. They cannot believe a mother can do this to her own son. On a whiteboard, I quote the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Articles 10, 12, and 29.2. I'm told over the speaker that doing so will guarantee a longer stay. A watchdog organisation visits the facility. I tell them what is happening. They turn a blind eye. After 6 weeks, they finally settle on a story. I have now been labelled completely normal, with one exception. I have a delusion, and my delusion is that I believe a girl might have feelings for me. The entire facility breaks down in laughter at my accusers. There is a new court hearing. A new psychiatrist speaks in the name of my accusers, with bizarre stories about me. He refers to my questionable past of mental illness. I refer to piles of evidence and witnesses they won't let me access, and that they have in front of them 2 court documents proving that I do not have a so-called mental illness and never have. Documents showing that my accusers were caught lying and my name was cleared. The court grows awkward and postpones the hearing in absence of any evidence against me. I am imprisoned even longer while my accusers are given time to frame me. It is now time for a new hearing. 2 men in white suits appear. They claim to have vast experience with me, but I've never met them before. They claim that I have a long, violent history of murdering people, and Cauliflower has a history of taking out apprehended violence orders against me. I deny it all, demanding they prove it. I pull out a smuggled USB stick with evidence and witness testimony that proves my innocence. The court ignores me as though I'm not even there. They grant the men in white suits everything they ask for, unquestionably. I'm now released under a legal order to drug me as they wish and do absolutely anything they want, with no oversight and legal immunity from being investigated. I'm reminded that they are above the law. I am to never go within 10 feet of another woman again, and if anyone makes a complaint against me, I will be locked up again permanently and drugged even further without question. I am told that my rights and freedom are an unnecessary privilege, and I should be grateful for their generosity while it lasts. As I leave, I am supposed to be given painkillers for the torture they have inflicted on me. But after waiting for an hour, they are nowhere to be seen. When I make it home, I collapse. I'm so disabled and in so much pain that I cannot even cry. Three days later, I'm in hospital emergency. I beg them to do anything to stop the pain and torture, ending my life if they have to. They prescribe a cocktail of heavy painkillers. It doesn't work. As I degenerate from the chemical rape, torture, and internal mutilation, my body twists and curls up like a dead cockroach. As time goes on, I'm in and out of hospital emergency. The psychiatrists who are doing this to me are eventually brought in. They mock and laugh at me, deprive me of painkillers, and remind me that if I don't keep quiet and go along with it, they will lock me up permanently and drug me even more. I'm told by the terrified hospital staff that they can't do anything or they and their families will be targeted too. They tell me to just keep coming back to hospital emergency and charging the government for it until someone is forced to investigate. Psychiatric staff come to me every day or two. They continue force drugging me, tormenting me and reminding me how they are above the law. With my body curled up like a dead cockroach, I fight through the torture the best I can, repeatedly confronting them with piles of evidence and witness testimony, proving my innocence of the incoherent, ever-changing accusations they keep making up to justify what they are doing to me. They make feeble excuses for why they can't look at it and end up saying, "We're medical professionals, we don't need evidence." In fear of being investigated over the series of emergency visits, they follow through with their threats of locking me up again. They deprive me of painkillers. I degenerate into a constant seizure, huddled in the corner, foaming at the mouth, begging to die. They become aware that I have been secretly recording everything they're doing to me and sending it to safe locations in other countries. They decided to let me out again. I'm now told that they don't like my personality and want it gone. What they don't like is my moral courage and integrity, and the fact that no matter what they do to me, they cannot mold me. They're offended at the idea of anyone standing up to them, and scared that I will encourage others to stand up against this thing they had going under the table. And that thing was a fragile alliance of corruption, extreme corruption, across multiple government departments, where they all cover for each other and operate through legal loopholes. I tried to fight them legally, but no court would deal with my case. I tried legal aid, offering them piles of horrifying hidden camera footage with confessions. But I was delayed and referred back and forth for months, only to find my application was left on a shelf all that time. I fought through the torture as much as I could and pushed for legal action. In the end, they begged me not to challenge them. Then they threatened me. Then they threw my application out over a technicality they conjured up. One time, on the way back from legal aid, I was on a bus. As I sat there, slumped over a seat, completely paralysed, unable to speak, and about to black out from the pain, Cauliflower comes on the bus with her sister. I sit there in a fog of agony, paralysed and speechless. I see another psychiatrist as a last resort to get the legal order revoked. He admits that I have no perceivable mental illness. He's blocked from accessing the details. After several visits, he confesses that he will do nothing, on the basis that he respects the psychiatrist behind it all and will not question his untouchable reputation. This led to me investigating that reputation. He came to Australia as a displaced Jew from post-Nazi Germany, murdered one of his wives in cold blood, and spent only 3 years in prison for it. Long list of apprehended violence orders against him for stalking, assault, death threats, you name it, which he repeatedly violated without consequences. Long history of being repeatedly locked up in psychiatric institutions. Became a doctor where many of his patients mysteriously died. Chronic drug addictions, which he used his medical license to feed. Widespread criticism and cries of conspiracy by doctors and professors around the world. Every one of his partners urgently warned authorities that his pure evil means to abuse his medical license to harm the vulnerable, and that he is an imminent threat to everyone around him. He previously worked at one of the most notorious psychiatric facilities in the world, alongside another doctor who also killed his wife, and where the man in charge committed suicide after being caught and exposed. A facility where over 1,000 vulnerable people, including children, were kidnapped under bizarre mental illness accusations such as PMS and simply being overweight. where the victims were strapped to a hospital stretcher for months at a time, put into a coma for the entire time with fatal overdoses of tranquilizers because they kept waking up and screaming in terror, while they had their brains hooked up to a wall outlet where they were repeatedly electrocuted in the head every day, which resulted in death and suicide among the survivors. There are no officially acknowledged complaints against him, because anyone who makes a complaint quietly disappears under his care after being kidnapped and labelled with bizarre mental illness accusations. This man is protected by an entirely and irreparably corrupt government and medical establishment who use this man and other abominations like him to covertly kidnap, frame, torture and murder any critic or whistleblower they can get their hands on. In fact, this is the very purpose of psychiatry, to operate outside the law and service corruption itself, while they pretend to care for the vulnerable with fake medical terms, committing the worst crimes against humanity conceivable for their own psychopathic enjoyment behind closed doors. Through legal loopholes, redefining laws out of context and secret laws being passed under the table, this man has been given the legal power to accuse anyone, anytime, of any random, and often bizarre, mental illness, without any need to prove or explain anything. And by simply accusing them, he empowers himself, by intentional design by the government, complete authority to kidnap anyone, anytime, simply with the words mental illness. From there, he has the legal power to do absolutely anything to his victims, and I mean absolutely anything, behind closed doors, with absolutely no oversight, immune to investigation. And this man, of all people, is the accuser and judge of my moral character. On top of what was being done to me, the thug attacks, drive-bys mocking my manhood, and prank phone calls continued every day. I was privately reminded by the parasites of psychiatry that love is a mental illness. In their opinion, my capacity for both love and inspiration makes me an abomination and a danger to the conformist, defeated society they crave to cultivate and exploit. They think that by permanently defacing me at every level and deleting my ability to experience emotions, that they can somehow disable my moral code and destroy love. They don't understand. I cannot be molded, and love is a value, not an emotion. They would not leave me alone. They would pursue me no matter where I went, backed by every branch of government. No one had the moral fortitude to stand up to them. I would not allow them to deface me any further. If they would not stop, I would end it once and for all. And all the hidden camera recordings I made could hopefully put an end to this cult and corruption once and for all. My old friend who betrayed me came to stand up for me. He admitted some of his lies, but insisted Cauliflower said she loved me and the letter was real. He was a first-hand witness of almost everything. He testified to my innocence of the endless list of stories they made up about me. We confronted them, and he stood up for me. I told them if this charade continues any further, I will end my life and the hidden camera footage will be released. Suddenly, I am magically cured. They accidentally admit to my friend that I was never so-called mentally ill to begin with. They leave me alone, and 2 months pass. They start again. I am told that the woman who was force injecting me fell over and broke her arms. She was now back in action, with a vengeance. She kept leaving messages on my answering machine and letters in the mail, informing me of her intention to continue messing with me, reminding me that she was above the law, and if I don't let her continue, she has the authority to take out more legal orders against me. I sent her a very stern letter back, warning her that if I get just one more phone call or letter in the mail, I will bombard every news outlet in the country with the hidden camera footage of what she did to me and come after her personally. I never heard from her again. Over time, the pain improved to some degree, but due to the targeted brain damage they inflicted on me, I was no longer capable of experiencing pleasure, happiness, or any positive emotions. There was no colour to anything. It was all grey. All I had left was the principles I lived by. Despite the thug attacks, I tried to go out like I once did. I wanted to remember what it was like to feel alive, but all I could find was a shadow, the faded memory of a life that once was. I couldn't feel anything but intense suffering and solitude, trapped inside a cold, dark prison that no one else could see. And then one time, Cauliflower appears. She walks up behind me. I open the door for her. She walks past and turns around. She asks me, "Have we stopped this whole scenario? Have we stopped this whole thing? Are you alright?" I didn't even know where to begin. As I try to speak, her friend comes up and yells at me to stay away from her. Cauliflower defends me and says it's alright. Then she does a flip and tries to be dominant. Then she suddenly flips again and admits I've never done anything wrong. Then she runs away. I get a phone call in the middle of the night. It's a woman on the other end, claiming to be Cauliflower, but it sounds nothing like her. She calls me several times, trying to get me to meet her in the corner of a street in the middle of winter, in the middle of the night. I decide to go, just in case. No one shows up. Then another phone call, abusing me for not showing up and accusing me of things I've never said or done. I now find out some horrible news. Months earlier, she fell off a 3-story building, just like I did when I was little. I'm told that an ambulance had to revive her. She had a dozen surgeries on her back, had a frame drilled into her body to hold her bones together, and had to learn how to walk again. It happened during the height of my torture. When she was at her worst and almost died, so was I. And yet, even after that, she never reached out to me. Or did she? One of the silent hang-up phone calls were from a hospital phone. Whoever was on the other end quietly moaned in pain, then hung up the background music. When you hang up on a hospital phone, it puts you on hold and that very same background music plays. Was she silently reaching out to me? I tried so hard to hold on to who I once was, but nothing came back. The brain and nerve damage was permanent. I overcompensated with more kindness, and then my kindness and vulnerability was exploited. A shady family befriended me and began borrowing money off me in the name of emergency scenarios. They systematically milked my bank account of all the money I saved up when I was too sick to spend it. When the money ran dry, they turned on me and showed their true colours. They wasted it all on drugs, alcohol, gambling and homosexual clubs. And then one time was being chased by 4 men. No member of their family would lift a finger to help. Instead, they asked me to save her from them. They asked me to save her for them. I left immediately and saved her. That made her feel so special. I explained to her that being special is not about what other people do for you, but what you do for other people and the intent behind it. I explained that I would have put my life on the line even if it was for a stranger, and that she knows at least one person whose life I saved under those very circumstances. She was so offended and jealous of Cauliflower. If there weren't enough lies about me already, their family went around making up lies about me all over the place out of spite for what they can never have, and to cover up the money they stole from me. They confessed that they have been talking to Cauliflower about me for a long time now. They engaged in a widespread Facebook smear campaign. I responded by posting evidence to prove my innocence and screenshots to prove they did in fact systematically milk my life savings. They stole my phone and copied a naked photo I had to show a friend privately and settled the false rumours about my manhood once and for all. They said they were using it on homosexual hookup sites for themselves. They went around showing it to people and falsely accusing me of exposing myself. They made up stories to other members of the LGBT cult, and I was bombarded with abuse and threats over things I've never said or done. They thought that because my reputation was already destroyed by psychiatry, they will get away with exploiting me by calling anything I say a delusion. What most people don't know is that when a person is labelled delusional by psychiatry, their reputation and credibility is destroyed whether it's true or not. And that is the whole purpose of psychiatric labelling. The victims are then exploited by opportunistic parasites who steal, rape and extort, knowing that no one will believe their victim. But in my case, I had screenshots and evidence to prove it, and a small group of friends from around the world who backed me up. Their smear campaign backfired on them. People were looking at the screenshots and logs and seeing the truth. They now had a notorious reputation. They began ambushing me from behind in the dark and making death threats. A lot of people came to me, warning me that they were making up sick stories about me and that they had some people fooled. It's now near the end of the year. The thug attacks and prank phone calls continue. Various government departments step up their campaign against me. I'm now receiving multiple copies of the same ambulance bill. Debt collectors begin calling me up every day, demanding my personal information and MC payments. I keep calling up the ambulance service, but they cannot offer an explanation. Every time they say it's sorted out, more debt collector phone calls within the hour. More demands of me to pay conjured up fees. More threats of fines and imprisonment. One government department after another. A new neighbour moves in. He just happens to be a retired diplomat. The terrorist expands his attacks onto the diplomat. I cannot stand by and allow it to happen. I document and record everything. As the diplomat goes through the same everyday police intimidation and thug attacks, he was also kidnapped by psychiatry, but only given a scare. For some reason they had a vendetta against him too. If it wasn't for me, they would have taken him out early. The police and government departments begin confronting me over it, warning me that if I keep protecting him, they will pull the psychiatry card on me again. They warn him that if he maintains any association with me, then he will go insane just like me, and they will pull the psychiatry card on him again. I continue documenting everything, in absolute and unapologetic defiance. He reports it all to various government watchdog agencies. They promise to act, but only run him around in circles. It ends up going through a series of court cases. Evidence consistently goes missing, and false police testimony is all they need to frame him. He's framed for the very crimes that are being committed against him. He suddenly disappears. Police come looking for him, but he is already gone. While all this happened, I had already spent the past year and a half contacting one government watchdog agency after another. I was delayed, diverted, lied to, ignored, referred back and forth, rejected on fictional technicalities, threatened, and in some cases my complaints were leaked back, with intimidating phone calls by those I made the complaints about, reminding me that they are above the law, self-regulating, and nothing will ever happen. Every government agency is corrupt. They all cover for each other, but live in constant fear because it's all held together by a series of fragile agreements. Something was very wrong. My hair suddenly fell out. My body fell apart. The pain and nausea came back. I was unsure whether I have much time left. I hurried to finish up loose ends before my body failed completely, or the government departments finally kidnapped me again, or the thug attacks, vandalism, and government-endorsed terrorist threats take my life. I was running out of time. I needed to finish what I started. With the help of friends, I began the campaign to engage Anons about the core principles and real problems in the world, while searching for the catalysts that are necessary for bringing about the last and most important intervention. And that intervention is a global rebuild of Turtle Island, a universal arena of consensus, where ideas are agreed upon. Their execution is transparent. Identities are protected. Personal attachment to beliefs are left at the door. Ideas are shared. Arguments are made, stored, resolved, databased, and re-examined at will. A place where reason reigns and truth is revealed to all. A place where predators are exposed from among their prey, and the prey become the hunters. A real United Nations as it should have been. Not one of governments, but one of all people without hierarchy. It is the home and heart of Anonymous. And it can only happen under the 3 starting rules. 1. Cease attacking the innocent and vulnerable. 2. Cease establishing and protecting rigid, draconic hierarchies. 3. All are obligated to take reasonable measures to defend all others against violations of the above 2 rules. I engaged Anons head-on. Some recognised who I was right away. Others doubted. Most of them were scared. I engaged them on many topics, fighting through mountains of ignorance. I was threatened, even DDoS attacked. The attacks caused widespread internet outages. I stood against an army of scared hackers, armed to the teeth. I came, armed only with words, reason, and a message, and simply walked in the front door as only the founder could. I was approached by Anons about a prophecy called the Warriors of the Rainbow. They thought we might be the ones described in the prophecy. At first, I told them I wasn't here to fulfill any prophecy, but to fulfill the long-forgotten mission of Anonymous. But they kept coming with vivid depictions of us. I shared it with the others and they looked into it. From their feedback, I decided to look further myself. What I found was undeniable. When the earth is ravaged and the animals are dying, a new tribe of people shall come into the earth, from many, many colours, classes, creeds, and who by their actions and deeds shall make the earth green again. They'll be known as the warriors of the rainbow. From many colours, classes, creeds. When the time of the white buffalo approaches, the third generation of the white-eyed children will grow their hair and speak of love as the healer of the children of the earth. Since the beginnings of Anonymous, a series of white buffalo were born. White buffalo represent the innocent and vulnerable. One, cease attacking the innocent and vulnerable. The white-eyed children. The third generation, phase 3. It is currently phase 2. Will grow their hair and speak of love. Reveal myself from the hairless men with a story of love. They will wear the feathers and beads and paint their faces behind a mask. The ancestors are returning in white bodies, but they are red on the inside. Reform the idea of the white chiefs. Will be tested as they were when they were red ancestors by unnatural substances like firewater to see if they can remain on the sacred path. The return of the buffalo to Turtle Island. Turtle Island. Many creatures thought to be extinct or mythical will resurface at this time. A people who arise from Earth's ashes like the thunderbird, symbolizing rebirth. Next will come the planters sowing seeds of truth, justice, and freedom. In bodies of different colors, red, white, yellow, and black. Told by many peoples in many different ways. These people would wear feathers and beads and communicate with the flowers. Flower equals server hub. The list goes on and on and on. A new nation of multicolored beings. The fish would die in the streams. Fukushima nuclear disaster. The sovereign United Nations. Anonymous versus the UN. When the Earth's creatures have been hunted almost to extinction, a rainbow warrior will descend from the sky to protect them. The ancients did not believe that spirituality made men either righteous or rational, but rather that righteousness and rationality made men spiritual. The mysteries taught that spiritual illumination was attained only by bringing the lower nature up to a certain standard of efficiency and purity. The mysteries were therefore established for the purpose of unfolding the nature of man according to certain fixed rules which, when faithfully followed, elevated the human consciousness to the point where it was capable of cognizing its own constitution and the true purpose of existence. Over the whole earth they came, the people of every colour, sister, brother, father, mother, travelling over many a land, people of the rainbow children of the way with a fresh glow, finding their way star within. More and more joined, a song for the soul, a new way to live, a new way to see. It happened this way, and a new song, it came from within. If you can find the star, within then you will find what is, what was, and what will be. You see, it happened this way from within, the people of the way, the Rainbow Tribe. As time went on, more of them timidly approached me, believing I might be the one in their prophecy. But some didn't agree. They were offended at the idea that they weren't the one, and attacked me because I disagreed with their religious overtones. The more I looked, the more I found other prophecies, all telling the same story with a different context. Some of them approached me too, suggesting I might be the one in their prophecies too. Anonymous angelic army, a man stands up. Know that I will raise up within my church a man who will stand up and proclaim the truth. He will do this at a time when no other cardinal, bishop, priest, or any sacred servant of mine will have the courage to do so. The man I will raise is a brave soul, and many will be relieved when he speaks up. When he does this, many more will rise up and speak out. When he is raised, I have other plans to bring all those faiths together. Millions of people across the world will then realize the truth. They will swell, gather all creeds together. I will draw the heathen first. Millions of other souls will be drawn into a man-made religion, designed and created by the spirit of evil. The Christian Bible, Revelation 7:9. After this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands. The anonymous symbol with two palm-like branches. Revelation 21. The new city, a cubical mainframe. Streets of fiber optic light that never sleep. The nations will walk by its light. I was then approached over mysterious art and sculptures that are appearing all around the world. The sphere within a sphere, representing the machinations of a hidden underworld. New York, USA. California, USA. Dublin, Ireland. Hakone, Japan. Indianapolis, USA. Rome, Italy. San Francisco, USA. Tehran, Iran. Tel Aviv, Israel. United Nations headquarters. Washington, USA. Ground Zero, 9/11. There are many more examples, all around the world, hidden in plain sight. They didn't know what to think of me. They were afraid and didn't know whose side I was on. Word got around, rumours of researchers who wanted to learn more about me. Most of them were too afraid to speak. And then one of them told me about Denver Airport. An opponent defeated after a world war. The United Nations pacified by a false peace. An unseen rainbow in the background travelling through time. A boy can see horrors in the future. The real villain revealed, the united symbols of the UN. Two towers cut down by an Islamic scimitar. The rainbow continues, protecting racial heritage. The third world is not allowed to intervene. Turtle Island, covered in internet. The graves of racial heritage. human nature held captive and extinct. Burning forest of evolution. The true phoenix and the imposter, both in a suit case. Holding its head, a war of ideas. Tongue held out, a war of words. A zombie horse, wild with primal desire, an abomination, turned evil and corrupt without its heritage. Without a rider, without reason. Without the reins of willpower. Heritage and evolution preserved. A rainbow flower enlightens mankind. But I'm not trying to fulfill anyone's prophecies, nor will I allow puppetry to dictate and twist what I started. Whatever happens, happens. This world would not become a better place just because someone wants it to or because someone said it will. It won't happen by passing it on for someone else to deal with. It won't happen by jumping on a bandwagon to pretend you're a good person. It won't happen through platitudes, political correctness, and egalitarianism. It won't happen by conquest, subjugation, conformity, censorship, intimidation, and brute force. It can only happen through reason, forged in debate, maintained vigilantly by privacy of the individual and transparency of a redefined government. It will only happen through the courage and hard work of the few who are willing to step up, face the truth, and sacrifice the puppet strings of ego, reputation, beliefs, identity, and self-interest. To set a new example, to show what can be done, and build a better future, not for ourselves, but to break an ancient parasitic bond and unlock the potential of good in others. But there is only so much I can do. I tried to change the world and make it rain for all flowers, only to find the flower who inspired me, covered in thorns in a field overgrown with weeds. It doesn't have to be this way. A better world is possible. Stop the UN, end the big charade, understand the principles, rebuild the home of consensus. A war is coming, a war that will challenge everything you think you know to be true. If it isn't clear to you already, this story was never about me. After making the previous movie, my situation went from bad to worse. While the hacker war died down as hackers investigated me and found out I was telling the truth all along, the government continuously stepped up their game. Years of desperately trying to frame and assassinate me, police at my door every day at gunpoint. One time they came to tell me, at gunpoint, that I was going to prison for 10 years for being a vampire and a werewolf at the same time. They even called out the magistrate to confirm the court hearing. When I was first kidnapped, the entire police force surrounded my home for a whole day, claiming to be having a picnic, which conveniently ended in them saving my life because I was allegedly waving knives around and threatening to slit my wrists, justifying the entire heavily armed police force to break their way into my home, arrest me violently at gunpoint, parade me in front of the neighbourhood and imprison me for my own good. Their campaign only became worse over time. Attacked from every angle, framed in a never-ending series of bizarre court cases to corner me, assassination attempts and more. I knew my time was almost up. I released more than a gigabyte of evidence to every major Australian news network, all at the same time. An hour later, Government thugs were outside my home with weapons, threatening to slit my throat in my sleep if I didn't come out to fight them. I came out, not to fight, but to record it. I was attacked, and defended myself non-violently. The whole thing was on record. 15 minutes later, a crowd of police arrive, charging me and imprisoning me for allegedly attacking the thugs. They're my assassins, apparently, defending myself against assassins. This is ridiculous. Ignoring my recording of the whole thing, but it gets much worse than that. I begin by showing an example of the paperwork for my arrest, charges and imprisonment. I am charged for attacking the thugs, with no witnesses. The very alleged victims weren't even a witness to the very attack against them. But according to the police, there are 4 witnesses, and they are all police officers. Somehow, 4 police officers just happened to be there to witness a crime that the very victims didn't even know about. And the official cause of my alleged attack? Not appearing to have any employment and not contributing to the local community. While imprisoned, I demanded a lawyer. They refused to allow me access to one. Eventually, they let me out without even questioning me once, with a court date at the end of the month. The attacks and assassination attempts stepped up even more in the lead up to the court hearing. I contacted the local politician, David Meehan, with 2 CDs of evidence. He tried to find out where I was hiding and tried to get me locked up again by psychiatry. I went on the run until the day of the court case. Despite the danger, I still turned up. I asked for an adjournment and got one. Upon exiting the court, a crowd of police officers were waiting outside to kidnap me and take me to psychiatry again for the same accusations I am supposed to go to court over. The mainstream media was outside with a camera, recording as I was being taken away, begging for someone to save me. It never went to air. Upon entering the psychiatric facility, they abandoned all the accusations against me used to justify being imprisoned. Upon entering the psychiatric facility, I was interviewed and declared perfectly sane. They said they would just check with their superior and let me go. Suddenly, I am accused of having an unspecified mental illness. I am tortured with drugs even more than last time. After 50 days, I managed to escape and did an interview with an alternative media. I was caught several days later and spent almost a year imprisoned and tortured to the extreme. They changed their story over and over and ended up declaring me completely sane. But since the paperwork required some kind of justification for why I am even there, they settled on the accusation of having an unspecifiable mental illness. And that mental illness was documenting government corruption and being too smart for my own good. In the paperwork that followed, there wasn't a single mention of any so-called mental illness. While imprisoned, they took absolutely everything from me, even evicting me from my home. Once I was finally released, I was to be routinely drugged and tortured for the rest of my life. I couldn't take the torture anymore and went on the run from the government. My new home was repeatedly broken into and vandalized by police who were trying to catch me. I'm on the run from the government to this very day. The next video is the interview I did when I temporarily escaped. Okay, so I'm not going to include the interview. It goes for like an hour and a half or something like that. I'm not going to include all the evidence and footage, all this kind of stuff. Otherwise this video will go for many hours. This is just a narrative, so I'll skip the interview I did. You can find all that on the other videos I've done, my whole story. This is just a narration of my story, so the proper version of my story is a lot of this stuff's in there. And other videos on my YouTube channel, you can see piles and piles of evidence, and you can see me going through about 400 gigabytes of evidence, 23,000 files of recordings. So I'll skip to the next part after the interview. There's one more video of my narration left. As the torture and drugs wore off, on the run from the government, I fought as hard as I could to educate Anonymous. I was progressively censored from social media, and then I was suddenly told that cauliflower was days away from having a baby. I completely fell apart and gave up. I stopped eating and waited to die. I spent all my remaining time reading and watching videos by those who are fighting the good fight and losing, as evil becomes more desperate. Good and evil have chosen the label of their sides, the political right and left. I couldn't fight anymore. It was up to them to save themselves. But as I watched them in a hopeless war, links to prophecies kept appearing, reminding me of the prophecies I am destined to fulfill. I come across even more prophecies from all around the world, all saying the same story, the same man, the same one. I started eating again, just enough to review the prophecies. But I had nothing left in me. I longed to die. But everywhere I went on the internet, I was bombarded with the prophecies reminding me of my mission. With nothing to lose and begging for death, I challenged anyone and everyone to prove me wrong about the prophecies. I even offered money to anyone who can prove me wrong. Censored and banned all over social media, I offered my challenge all over the internet. I was censored almost everywhere. Not a single argument has withstood my claim and evidence. I gained a new strength, a strength of a death wish, begging for someone to prove me wrong about the prophecies, to free me of my destiny and give me the excuse to die. But everywhere I went, every opponent crumbled before me. I didn't want to be right, I wanted to be wrong. I just needed an excuse to die. But I couldn't. I couldn't forget my mission no matter how much I tried. And so I revealed my biggest secrets of all. The greatest story ever told. Far beyond anything you have seen in this story up until now. I've been hiding the biggest secret until last. The next videos reveal the greatest part of my story. First, I provide you with an example of the prophecies proving that I really am the one. After that, be prepared for a story beyond your wildest imagination. So after this video that's the end of the narration. After that, I've got like a 2-hour prophecy video where I go into an extreme detail. 2 hours is a long time and a lot of prophecies to read through. Proving that I am the one in these prophecies, proving no one has stood against the evidence. No one has come remotely close. And I've got a playlist on my YouTube channel showing the extremes I've gone, how I win every single debate against everyone, anywhere, ever. And after that, I go on to the biggest secrets of my story in the rest of my 11-hour movie, which involves the extraterrestrial topic. And if you want to watch that, you look on my YouTube channel, and it will be on there. And I'll have a narration playlist, and it's under the greatest story ever told playlist as well. The narration playlist will actually have the greater detail of this, because I've recently done a bunch of drawings and photos and stuff like that I've compiled for it, so the narration playlist will contain more details about that. Okay, so I'm done. That's done with the narration.